Coming soon. Coming soon. All right, here we are. Hey guys, welcome to Code Hangout number 100, the SudokuPad Grand Tour. And while we will do a few things differently, mostly it's going to be very similar. But today I'm not going to try to do any programming. At least I will resist if I can manage. And the idea of today's stream is to give us all, not just you, me too, a grand tour of SudokuPad. A long time has passed since I've been working on it, and it likely can do more and or less than any of us know, including me. So I want to kind of just do a rundown, see what it can do, what it used to do, what it should do, and you know, what all the settings mean, what features it has, what various weird nooks and crannies it has that may or may not mean something. And hopefully provide some answers and maybe some reference material, video clips that I can point to later on. Maybe slice the stream up into a few useful bits. Before we get started, I'm Sven. I'm Sven of the Sven's SudokuPad app. Been working on this thing now for more than 2.5 years, because I started, I think, in July 2020. Yeah, and I started basically, I came across Simon and Mark on Cracking the Cryptic on their YouTube channel, just like most of you guys. And I watched a few videos, really enjoyed it. And I noticed how Simon was often talking about things to come in the future and little things that bugged him and so on and so forth. And I thought, you know, hey, I could do stuff like that. So I knocked together a little prototype over a couple of weekends, got in touch with them on Twitter, and tried to figure out what's going on. And apparently Sam at the time, who had built the original app, wasn't around to do updates. So I kind of kept at it for a couple of months and eventually built something that they now use in their videos. And yeah, still working on it. Hey, Michael Edwards, welcome to the stream. Thanks for joining on YouTube. It'll be nice to have everybody in one place so we can have a bit of a Q&A going on. I am not professional set up to put questions on the screen and whatnot, but I'll try my best. And any questions you have, anything you would like to learn more about, or anything that you think is really cool and you think other people should learn about, put it in the chat, and we'll have a little talk about it, right? So, yeah, been working on this for more than 2.5 years now, and it's about time to kind of take stock what's in there and take a look at all the nitty gritty bits. I am going to go through each individual setting, kind of talk about what it means, see if I remember what they all do. And yeah, before we get started with that though, I want to take a bit of a look back at what it used to be like. So I have an early version of it here. And this is version, let's see, we are back in time here. The version number here is 0.22.1 alpha. Hey, Pascal, how are you doing? It's JavaScript, front end and back end, all JavaScript. No fancy frameworks, no extra tools, no extra layers, all just raw JavaScript, like a crazy person. When I started doing this, it was on the weekends just for the funsies. So I kind of enjoyed stepping away from all the, the React and the, build processes and Webpack and all that stuff that I have to deal with at work. So I wanted to do something more relaxed. And yeah, now I'm kind of paying the price for some of those decisions. And there's certain aspects of it that definitely need to move into stacks. Like, for example, for some of the servers, I just build it raw based just on Node.js HTTP modules, when it really should be running on something like Express at the very least, maybe. And maybe, with a proper proxy like Apache or something in front of it, and just instead of my own home built proxy stuff built in raw JavaScript and Node.js and all that. Yeah, so let's have a quick look. This was, there were earlier versions, and I have them, but they were started up slightly differently. So I'd have to kind of change the way the servers started up, and yeah. Oh, actually, there is one really early version. Let's go there first, because it all started on CodePen, if I recall. So let's see. And CodePen is basically just a little online tool for kind of prototyping JavaScript. So, and I like doing that for putting together quick prototypes, proof of concepts, or just solving small problems on the quick, So let's see, it should be not too far back. Yeah, you see there's version 0.11. Let's see if there's an even older one. I mean, that's technically the very first one. I guess I didn't keep copies of the earlier ones. Yeah, so this was actually the very, very first prototype that was, with a little selection animation. Nobody liked that when I put that in. And this was initially basically just a full-on clone of Sam's original site that maybe some of you still remember. And it had, undo redo. That was like kind of probably the most complex functionality it had. It didn't have multicolor yet. It basically had nothing extra on there yet. And I probably should put together things like a link to this online somewhere. Maybe like after this stream, I'll put together a little guide to some of these other things. Yeah, I should take a look at Svelte. Wouldn't have to change much about the naming. So yeah, and this actually had some of the original layout of even some sample puzzles in here. It has some of the original layout of the code in there, how key handling it was done and stuff. And some of this is still just like this, which is maybe not a good thing, since apparently this was some of the earliest code I've built. And I think what I'm probably proudest of is the way I dealt with the undo redo stuff. Basically, and I don't know if that's the standard way of doing it, it's just how I've done it in the past. But basically, everything you can do in the app, anything like clicking, typing in a character, and so on and so forth, anything the app can execute has a simple representation called an action. So it has a highlight or a select action, it has a enter digit action, it has a undo action, etc. And it basically just records the actions you're doing. And to do an undo, it basically just plays back all the actions minus the last action. That's kind of, in principle, what it does. And that's why it can record replays and so on. And that's why I included things like selection in that, partially for the undo. You want to be able to select and then select some more, but then I want to be able to undo certain things. And here, don't know. Yeah, I think it does a multi-step undo, like it undoes to the most recent non-selection step. But it also enables replays, and by adding timestamps to these actions, we can do basically video replays. We can replay how the person played the puzzle, including undo and redos, because I always thought it would be interesting to watch a solver after the fact. And I guess the one thing it doesn't include is like mouse movements. It doesn't let you see if a person is pointing at a cell or is hovering over something or any kind of meta actions like that. And that's something I've always considered maybe in the future to add that, just maybe as an opt-in. Maybe a streamer wants to include that, or maybe for competition, or for like if you want to do a challenge, you could record. People could solve it live online, and somebody could watch on a page, maybe multiple people playing, and so on and so forth. Yeah, one thing I want to do going forward, and I don't know if I'll be able to implement that going backwards, would be that every version remains available, right, under a different, let's say, folder or subdomain or something. So that, for example, if there's a breaking change, people can actually link their puzzle to a non-changing version. And even, they don't have to update a puzzle then if it breaks. They can just say, hey, this puzzle worked on this version. Here's an eternal link that will always work. And it might not have the latest features available. My audio sounds a bit odd, so I don't know. I think I'm peaking a little. Let me know if the volume is right. I'm going to turn it down a little because I see a bunch of peaking here. At the same time, I don't want to be too quiet. Yeah, so this was basically the first version that was playable, that I could send to Simon and Mark and say, hey, this is what I've got. Can you do something with it? And looking at the code right now, I can tell you this already has so much of the current app in it. Like, obviously, it doesn't have, it even has a lot of the puzzles that I was using for testing in there. And it doesn't have, like, any of the advanced features in it. But the current app, like, if you look at this code and you look at the current app, you probably could do a diff and it would still find a lot of this stuff. Like, this didn't have a conflict checker yet. I don't actually know what it would have done. Yeah, there was no conflict checking or anything like that. So that's kind of separate chunks of code, but like I have these basic classes, they're still the same. We have the puzzle, we have the app, and we have the renderer. I think these were and I think we already had the replay class here for decoding and encoding of replay data. We had the cell, the grid, SVG renderer, and a couple of helpers. Yeah, and that's still the same today. And the layout here is straight up the version that's like a clone of Sam's original. Oh, it did have a basic checker here. Interesting. So it did have a checker, but it didn't have it pulled out into its own code base. Yeah. And it didn't have any error highlighting and all that stuff. And let's just get that. Oops. Let's put that over there. Yeah, and I think one of the early things I was working on was to like update the user interface. So, for example, one of the things I wanted to do was eventually replace all this text by icons, just to have more space for buttons and so on. So this is now I don't know if this version was live online or if this was still doing the era when they were still linking to the old one, but this was definitely available online. So this is in a code layout that I uploaded on a server for them. And still the same thing, more or less. I don't actually see anything better. There's a restart button now. And then I basically had things like known issues, which this stuff probably doesn't work because I don't have the same web server setup. But a lot of this was for testing, right? To set it up for testing so we could go into preparing it, seeing, hey, if it's ready. So let's have a look at a couple of versions. We probably don't have to go through too many of them because not that much changes visually. I mean, obviously, mostly the button layout and maybe the colors and stuff. The puzzles more or less render still the same. I mean, backwards and forwards compatibility was always very important, right? So here we're at version 0.221, and these are not all the versions. Let's see, wait a second, git fetch. I think if I do this, I should be able to get all the tags. Get pull tags. All right, it tells me what it thinks I mean. 1 second, I'm gonna look that up quickly. And the music stopped. What happened there? Or did I just turn it down? Oh, I just turned it down too low. How are the levels? Is volume all right? So I need to do git fetch all tags. That doesn't seem to be getting me all the tags. I should have checked this out before starting the stream. Maybe that's just all that. Maybe I wasn't that diligent about tagging versions earlier on. But yeah, also not every version got a tag, because not every version was released. So there's going to be some big steps actually. Well, let's jump forward to, let's see what we have. We have 0.45. Let's see what that looks like. And it shouldn't take too long to update these. Yeah, so here I was experimenting with building my own icons. But there's probably something, either this, it literally is like this in the code base, or it could just be the way I'm serving things. It's not finding the right styling and or whatnot. Or I'm on some sort of zoom level that doesn't play ball with this. All right, so this one didn't do too much. Let's see. 0.62.3. Let's see where we are here. All right, just checking all the chat channels. Hey, Thomas Miles, how are you doing? Hi, Michael. Mark's here as well. All right, and I'd like to see if, because at some point I was starting to display the version number in, yeah, so it's in the title, 0.623. All right, so here we added full screen. We added a link to the legacy. The buttons are still broken. We added settings, which don't work. And we have a link in case there was a video, which also doesn't work. All right, well, that's not very interesting. All right, this is a big jump from 62 to 100, 0.122.0. I really don't know why there weren't more versions in between. I can't believe I waited that long with the release, but it could also be that there isn't that much time in between these. There's probably a way of showing time. That'd be nice, but I'm not gonna be looking for that. Wait, git tags with dates. Can we see the type and date of git tags? Ugh, there's whole scripts and whatnot. Yeah, I think that's more complicated than I'm prepared for. So this should be version. So this is now the first time. So this is already post-release of the mobile app. So we have Open Puzzle with SudokuPad here, which actually still works. Look at that. And we have the new layout of buttons, and we have multicolor. So this is kind of almost like the modern version now. Yeah, so it has all the main stuff. It has our settings, all the classics here, none of the advanced stuff yet. I mean, we currently have 44 different settings, so this is going to grow quite a bit. But I was also more careful about keeping the numbers small. So this is almost like the modern layout then. And we have the mobile select button. So this was kind of the biggest jump to the modern version. We even have this menu here. So very little has changed from this main layout. Let me see if the mobile layout, yeah, still very similar. I mean, we have got things now, I think, yeah, even pen tool was already in at this point. We had the replay tool. We didn't have the letter tool yet. That's more recent. I think this was all the... it had this and these. Interesting. So it didn't have the colors yet. And I think there were some issues with this. But by and large... Oh, thank you. Hey, Andy. Does that... Oh, I think this works only for a specific tag. I want it for all tags. Yeah, it's all right. So this was November 2011. So that's like, it was already a year and a half old at this stage. So I'm not going to go through the rest of the versions since I don't think there's that much individual change. I think the earliest versions are the most interesting ones. And now a lot of the changes are internal and things like importing from fpuzzle. And these were the main the main improvements and changes. And we also have I think the change list doesn't even exist yet in this version, because in the current version we have a change log, and it might make sense sometime to actually put this in as a web page, maybe with screenshots. Like, it would be nice to actually just do an animation of just kind of the UI changes, although there weren't that many, so an animation might be a little excessive. All right, so let's jump straight into the present, and I think I'm gonna reset that because that's solved, and we don't want to. That's actually not the best puzzle to show off, so I'm just gonna go with something like this. So this is the current app that I think most of us use on a daily basis now, and yeah, I mean, it's a standard Sudoku app. So we have our grid where we enter our digits. We have the name and the description of the rules in the puzzle. We have our little killer cage calculator up here. We have our settings, our full screen, which I use personally all the time on my phone. We have the rules, which is maybe not the clearest icon. We have this sort of hint feature that kind of gives you a quick overview what all the things on screen mean. But I don't think a lot of people use it, and it's very out of date. Like, I haven't really updated it to kind of, like, I haven't touched this in many, many months, so it doesn't know anything about anything more modern. The fact that it still even works at all is I'm actually quite happy with, because I created it in a sort of dynamic fashion that it kind of finds where things are on the screen. So even as the layout changes, it should still highlight the things correctly. And in fact, in this case, it even highlights the individual buttons here. We have our restart button, which got quite fancy over the years. We have now restart, keep time. If you restart, you can actually undo past the restart, so it keeps a copy of the prior replay to, if you accidentally restarted by tapping twice quickly or something like that. Then we have our basic input keypad, which can be inverted for people who like, this is sort of the phone order, but then people can have the keyboard order with the 1 at the bottom. We have our letter digit toggle here. Why that changes on hover, I have not noticed this before. This might actually be one for the to-do list. I'm gonna put that in here. I have this running to-do list of things I come across, otherwise I immediately forget. Let's see. Digit, letter, toggle, changes to... what does it change to? A 9 or an A? Just to a 9 on hover. It might be on purpose. I might be indicating what you're switched to. So if I'm here, but in this case, it switches to A/, and I see a large A in the background. So either way, something doesn't work quite well there. And then we have our delete button. So kind of for the mouse only operators that don't have access to delete, and obviously on mobile phone keyboards, we need that. And then we have our tools, which to this day, I'm not super happy with. Basically, the basic tools, we had only 4. And you saw the layout resizes a little bit to kind of maximize the amount of space taken, so on, and not too big, yada, yada, yada. But as more tools get added, I kind of go into a second column, which makes all the buttons a bit smaller, which is fine on desktop, but on mobile phones, that's a little bit of an issue. So it's something I've been pushing into the future for future me to tackle. But yeah, we have so we have the 4 basic tools: digits, corner marks, center marks, and colors. And colors are obviously multicolor now, and now they're even multicolor palette. So I'm hijacking the digit letter toggle. And in the old version, the delete button was just simply bigger. And we have 40 colors in our color palette. An ongoing discussion is if the white should be a singular white across all 3 palettes, because currently it's 3 different colors. But of course, since people can change the colors, it's not necessarily a white. So especially when it comes to, let's say, sharing a replay, maybe shared replays must include the person's color palette, right? I don't know. So there's a couple of open questions. We have our pen tool. I somewhere have on my to-do list, maybe not on this one, but I had it on my to-do list to actually to enable color editing for this as well. Color editing for pen tool. I mean, that's just for completeness sake. It's not exactly a requested feature. Oh, you don't see what I'm typing on here. I'm basically, you know what? I might as well bring this up here. This is just like a running to-do list that I always keep around, even on a day like today when I'm really just giving a tour. But yes, we have our pen tool, which has had many enhancements over time, such as edge lines, center lines, marking on the outer edge, which was a technical impossibility when the puzzle was first designed. Yeah, Mark made many contributions to this tool, actually. I think he did the outer edge markings. I don't remember, actually. It's in the changelog as well, and in the code. And finally, we have our sort of operational buttons: undo, redo, the solution check, and the selection toggle, which is for mobile. So the idea is that with a single click, you can choose multiple disjoint selected areas, because obviously on mobile phone, you cannot control click like you can on desktop, where I can just use a control key to select multiple things. So the controls aren't actually, super complex, and that's very much by design. The whole purpose of this app is to be easy to use and to make things, solving these puzzles, a smooth operation. I think, Penpa has more complex tools. SudokuPad has no setting tools. But I always aimed for making it as usable as possible and making it usable on mobile and on different sort of devices and different layouts. It should resize relatively smoothly. For example, personally, I actually prefer I don't like this layout on desktop. I like actually having the rules always visible. So I basically always play with the DevTools open just like that. In part also because I'm always testing, right? So I always want to see if there's any errors or anything showing in the console, So that's kind of how it all works. So that's the basic app. Yes, there's a few more items. We have our clock at the top with our pause and resume. We have our all-important link to what I call the link server, where basically this gives you the link for the mobile app. And the reason I have these pages is because if I link directly this special link for the mobile apps, which also works on desktop here, if you don't have the app, then just nothing happens, and it's not clear why. So by bringing up this page, at least people who don't have the app, get an idea of what's going on. And we have a little menu here with a couple of social links, and I have some links for the beta site here, mostly for my own use. And it will also show links to videos if they are available. If there's a video, my little script scans the Cracked and Encrypted YouTube channel and adds some flags onto these puzzles if it finds them in, usually for the daily video. This is a manual process, so it's usually the day after or whatnot. Now that's the core functionality, right? And, the more advanced stuff, or the more sort of specific things, such as, you know, which hotkey specifically switches a particular feature or how exactly a feature works. Like, for example, in the early days when we first added multicolor, multicolor was an optional extra toggle. So, you know, it defaulted to a single color, and then you had to enable multicolor in settings. And it was a bit of a weird thing. There were still people at the time who didn't like multicolor, and the problem was that, for example, replay wouldn't be compatible. Like, the system wouldn't really know what to do with a multicolor replay where there was no multicolor feature available. So, and that's, to be honest, also a problem I will face in the future, is what happens with replay data that it uses features that the target app doesn't have, especially if I ever get to a point where people can build their own feature plugins and things like that. But today we're not here to solve problems, so that is not our concern. So yeah, I mean, I think I might as well mention the mobile app here at this point. So before, when I clicked that link, it actually opened the mobile app, or in this case, the desktop version of the mobile app. And in my, this is the my local version with a debug console, and this lets you import the puzzle. And this is basically the main way that I'm currently supporting this operation. I'd love to say that this is paying my full-time, you know, pays the rent, and it doesn't exactly. That's mostly paid by debt, by borrowing money. But other than that, this is kind of where I'm at. And like some of you might know, this is quite out of date. So this is based, I think, on version 130. 0.131, I believe. And yes, I've been working on an update, and the update is more or less finished, but there are a couple of kind of things that I have to kind of polish out before I can release it. And releasing is a huge effort, just getting new versions up onto the app stores and stuff. So it's been a hard thing for me to get done, but it's got to get done very soon. And most of the work of updating it, in fact, I think, yeah, this is actually basically the version now with the current engine in it, right? With version whatever, 0.311 or whatnot. And which supports fog puzzles and supports, you know, all sorts of, yeah, so for example here, that'd be a fog puzzle, right? Already available in my local development version of the app. And yeah, so the app is basically the web app, but then wrapped with this menu system and a couple of extra features. And the goal is, what I would like to do is I would like to have feature parity between web and mobile. And then probably what I'll do is that people that buying the mobile app is kind of the subscription method, right? So by buying the mobile app, you basically get an account with sort of the cloud service. And then when you use the web app, you have access to the same puzzles. It stores your progress, and you can share between your mobile app and web at any time. While regular users of just the web app, they have just the per puzzle singular experience that they currently have. That's kind of where I'd like to go. And then maybe in the future, maybe have my own way of people who don't care about the mobile app, you know, that they can just have some sort of account fee or something to pay for, you know, hosting and, you know, rent and electricity and all these sorts of little luxuries in life. So that's where that is. And this app is available. This is on Android, iOS, and Windows at the moment. There is a prototype Mac version, and that's something that as soon as I've finished this particular update, the Mac version will go out as well. People have asked for a Linux version, and people are running it on Linux. I don't know how. I get sales on Linux, so there's some sort of like Steam conversion thing going on. But I don't personally know how I can even do such a thing like a Linux binary that, you know, there's so many different binaries, package systems, and all that stuff. I'm not very knowledgeable with that, so I'll have to tackle that in the future sometime. Yeah, and that's where we are at with the main sort of app. Let me actually get rid of that. I have that down here. I think it's the same thing, right? I didn't add anything. Yeah. Any questions so far? Are you guys happy? Whoops, I double-clicked something and now it's covering the whole screen. It's very nice to see so many of you guys popping in. Usually these streams are very quiet. I guess they're quite technical. So I think the main part of the tour is about to start, where I'm actually going to look into each particular feature. And then after that, we'll probably do a little bit of crystal balling. Actually, you know what? Let's do the crystal balling first. Let's have a look at what's coming up, or what I would like to come up, because unfortunately I actually have to make it. That's always a little bit in the way of things existing, waiting for me to make them. Trust me, that's as much of a problem for me as it is for you guys. But yeah, as you guys probably know, there's been an effort by Mark specifically to build a converter from PenPuff format to what I call SAM's format, basically how SAM's original app stored the data, except it's a little bit more flexible and more powerful, so it enables a few extra bits of information in there. And basically, when I import data from FPuzzles, it all goes into this sort of format. And there's a bit of a mess about exactly what formats do and what they can do and how things go from one to the other and all this stuff. So there's definitely, for me, a plan, ongoing effort to actually kind of have a more organized open source repository of these formats, of information about the formats, of conversion from one to the other. And I'd like to streamline all of that so all the formats are kind of well-defined, what happens, and they're all in the same way. There's no like... You know, because currently Simon and Mark like to use the old system with the IDs because of the short URLs, and there's no reason why not all puzzles couldn't have those kind of URLs. So that's definitely something that's very high on the sort of effort list, is to clean up exactly how puzzles are organized, how they're converted between formats. And this is kind of important for solvers, even though solvers don't usually care. They just want a link that works. And it's kind of important for setters, except setters don't really care. They just want their puzzle to work. So it's a bit of one of those black sheep in the family that nobody really cares about, but everybody really depends on. It's kind of important. Then for me, kind of related to the mobile app, I definitely want user accounts and cloud saves. I want people to have access to their puzzling history. I want people to be able to share puzzles they enjoyed. Like every time I solve a puzzle, I would love to press a button saying, hey, this is a puzzle I like. And I would like other people to be able to say, hey, you know, give me a list of Sven's favorite puzzles, you know, that kind of thing. And a long dream of mine is to also have a publishing channel where somebody like Fistamafil can go and say, hey, you know, here's my puzzles, you know, and somebody can say, hey, I want to get notified every time Fistamafil publishes a new puzzle, or here's the Cracking the Cryptic channel, and every time Cracking the Cryptic releases a new puzzle, either, you know, maybe there's the Patreon channel, their YouTube channel, and then maybe just for the funsies, stuff they like channel, and then you can subscribe to that and you get those puzzles into your app, you know, for your Sunday morning breakfast, that kind of thing. So these are kind of the big items that I really would like to do. There's another item that I'm sort of preparing for that's going to happen hopefully later this year, is to create I can't go into too much detail there. Hey Pascal, let me see. Is the puzzle data encoded in the URL, or is it stored in a database somewhere within with just this in the URL? So that is kind of the main thing. The puzzles are generally stored in the URL. The exceptions are the sort of short IDs that Simon uses for his videos, which refer back to Sam's original puzzle tool. And I pull the data out of that tool and have a local copy of those. But that's why usually the URLs are so big, because they contain all the data, and it creates certain limitations of what kind of things we can put in those. And it's tricky to use those URLs because they're so long, and then people use tinyurl. Tinyurl is like just a big puzzle database, really. So there's a lot of hassle associated with that. And that's part of what I would like to do. I would like to publish an API, a puzzle database where, you know, people can publish their puzzles, but it's a bit tricky because obviously, I need to make it clear what is what, whose puzzle they are, where they go, and so on and so forth, right? So in a way, for example, Logic Masters Germany is doing that, right? Because they obviously publishing URLs, and those URLs contain the puzzles, right? Well, yeah, the backend isn't really the problem. It's more like a historic reasons, because other tools have been doing it, and so each tool has kind of worked in a compatible way with other tools, and we all kind of fallen into this sort of whirlpool of dealing with it this way, you know? And of course, in a way, the data is stored all over the place, right? If you Google for these puzzle URLs, you know, Google is a database of puzzles, really, right? And my server logs are probably the biggest repository of Sudoku puzzles on the internet. So yeah, but this is definitely in the planning, and I would like to kind of sort that out. And part of that is, I'm the current site is hosted on Firebase, and their backend system is pretty crappy. And I've built up a version on Amazon, on AWS, like more than a year ago. I've been running 2 versions for all this time, but I had some performance issues, and I have recently resolved them. So the goal is basically to complete a server move to AWS, where then I have full backend access and can store things and run APIs and all this sort of thing. So that's the goal there. Yeah, sorry, I was just moving to... my brain just kind of took a jump there. Oh, remind me, where were we? We were moving from... Oh yeah, we were talking about future plans, right? We were talking about user accounts, about publishing channels, all these exciting things. Oh yes, I was talking about... so there's a goal. I've been contacted with some professors at a university to work on an academic version of the app. So it's kind of going to be a little bit of a white label type situation where basically I'm going to provide the engine, and then we'll basically wrap it in a new interface and to make something more friendly to younger solvers, and to basically create a sort of a fun learn math through doing fun Sudokus type situation for younger puzzlers, right? So it'll be a separate site with puzzles, that are specifically designed for that, for like early solvers, first steps, then maybe more advanced puzzles that include maths and, have basic, that develop potentially basic math skills. And, creating those puzzles isn't up to me. That's up to the university professors and students that design these. But I will basically be creating a modified version of the app with like a simplified design of the user interface. And in this case, also a collection of puzzles and user accounts and things like that. And hopefully, like for me, the big draw for that is that a better user interface and a user interface that's easier to use for young people is also easier to use for older people. So I'm hoping that there'll be a lot of improvements and redesigns to the user interface that will benefit everybody, and that I can backport into the main app, or more accurately implement in the main app, so then it's available everywhere. Because this user interface wasn't really designed by me. It kind of I cloned, the original app created by Sam Kaplan-Lyons, and then I just sort of squeezed and pushed and kneaded it into the current shape. But I never really stepped back and kind of said, hey, does this make sense, I mean, there were some things where I said, hey, for mobile, I want things on the right side, near the bottom. I want things in a certain sizes relative to each other and so on. But for example, I'm not very happy with the layout algorithm. It's always a bit of a struggle of how big things should be. Should they take up all of the space, which, for example, in this case, on a 28-inch monitor, it doesn't make sense. But on a phone, you want it to use up as much space as possible. So these are things that I'm hoping to be tackling in the sort of next couple of months. I think we're at a point now where we have so many features and we're relatively few requests for changing how things work and for fundamental updates and additions. I think the biggest one for that is basically a puzzle editor, which is like a whole big thing, and basically better, support for different formats and some basic editing, Like I definitely want to add like a basic, hey, the same way you can add a solution, you should be able to edit the description and create a new puzzle link and that sort of stuff. But we're very good on features, on the feature set in the app. So I think it's a good time to start stepping back a little bit. Like I've done 2 weeks of performance improvements recently, and it's on my phone. It brought the load time from over 10 seconds down to 3 seconds, something like that, of my alternate version on the other server. So I'm really looking forward to doing some of these improvements, clean things up internally, improve APIs internally, SDKs for plugin development. I've always been wanting to have a more flexible layout system. I would like to be able to let people decide how big the controls versus the board should be. I would like people to be able to decide if they want the vertical or the horizontal layout, no matter what their screen shape is. I would like to have a sort of maximal size button. So for example, on my phone, I like to have the video at the top and then have, if you imagine a phone layout, I basically will have my Cracking the Cryptic video in the top quarter with the split screen mode on Android. and then the rest of the puzzle will actually be a bit smaller than it could be, and the bar at the top is actually taking up quite a bit of vertical space. So I'd like to have a sort of maximal space efficient layout where it removes that bar, just maximizes the puzzle, especially for very large puzzles, 16 by 16 or something like that, where or very wide puzzles where suddenly you might lose, the cells might just get too small to even see or use properly, So layout is like a major field of upcoming improvement, Optimization, I've done a whole bunch, and there's a couple more things I want to do. There's been very recently a lot of big features, most of them are in the import-export, where you can now, load and save replay files. I can, let me see if I can do this without, yes, so I can take a replay file that I saved earlier and, drag it on here, and it'll load the puzzle with the replay, right? And when I finish a puzzle, it gives me the options to save the replay. This is currently live on the main version. So, there's that. There's now a setting for exporting settings. It'll save the settings as a file, and I can save them. So I could maybe have different settings if I'm a streamer, one set of settings with, or if I'm solving tough puzzles, I would like to have, or just, if I'm solving just for fun, maybe I'll have settings for conflict checking and highlighting and so on. And then if I want to do sort of, more serious puzzle solving for live stream, maybe then I have settings that disable some of those things, I see that a lot with YouTubers who will disable certain settings, such as, the conflict checker. There's a classic Sudoku checker and a full checker. They might not check the pencil marks. They might not have this show scene cells, which in this case, for example, highlights these Windoku cells and the diagonals and things like that. So I think now is maybe a good time to start looking at the settings. Let me see. I had a full list of the settings over here somewhere. Where did they go? Nope, that's this one. Here we go. No, they're not here. I did not keep a copy of them, apparently. Well, you know what? We'll just go down the list on the settings screen. So that we have these categories. The number of settings have exploded because I've not really thought them through from the beginning. I've just sort of been adding to them. Every time I have an idea, it adds a new setting because most of the time I want to be able to disable things, and quite often the default is disabled. So I add a lot of features that people maybe never learn about because there's currently no way for me to announce a new feature. So that's definitely something I also want to work on. I want to be able to have a way of something new popping up in the app, and then it should show a little notification in the corner saying, hey, do you want to keep this? Do you want to disable it? Do you want to learn more about this thing? So for example, the 3 in the corner is a feature that doesn't, that people enjoy. There's a little sparkler with the, put a 3 in the corner. And it should do a little sparkly, except right now I probably disable. Yeah, so puzzle events, and sure, and that might not suit everybody. A YouTuber might not like that. I don't actually want this to be solved right now. So this is something in general I want to be controllable by the user. Everybody controls their own experience. And by the way, this is not just a one-off thing, but I actually want to internally build a whole system for just generic puzzle events and triggers and effects and things like that. And this is also part in planning for the educational version of the app, right? So I would like to have callouts like, hey, good job, if somebody solves a particular complex thing, or color highlights in X-Wing or things like that, well spotted, like, oh, you're almost there when only singles are left, naked singles are left to solve, things like that, little callouts. And for that, I would like to have triggers, triggers like algorithms, basically bits of code that say, hey, I'm going to trigger if only naked singles are left, or I'm going to trigger when the first digit is entered, or and so on and so forth. And just as and I'm not going to do this for everything, but let's have a quick look at the actual code of what something like that would look like, right? So let's say we look at the puzzle events feature puzzle events. And let's see that. Yeah. So I basically implemented a couple of triggers and a couple of effects, and to be honest, they're more or less the same, right? So we have a puzzle trigger 3 in the corner, and basically what it does, and it's probably more complex than it needs to be, but it basically waits for a specific action, makes sure that that action represents a 3 being added in a corner. It checks that we are actually in a corner of a board, right? Then it fires a timeout, and it resets the timeout if things change. And then if the timeout expires, it triggers the event. So the idea is I can put a 3 in the corner, realize I made a mistake, remove it, and it won't just trigger the confetti anyways. And the timeout might be a bit too short. I think it's 1 second, so it might have to be like 2 or 3 seconds. But it's kind of, it was more of a test scenario of how something like this would work. And hopefully in the future, things like the timeout could be, built in things as part of the API, so we don't have to write, 2 pages of code to do something that simple, right? So we have a trigger now that triggers when there's a 3 in the corner. And maybe in the future, I can also combine triggers. So maybe there'll be a trigger corner cell and a trigger entered 3, for example, right? Instead of having one complex trigger and then a different complex trigger for another thing. And then we have a confetti effect, puzzle effect confetti. And why do I have effect confetti and puzzle effect confetti? Yeah, so I think I have the generic confetti effect in case I want to use it for something else. And I created a sort of specific effect. And then I'm just saying, hey, if we're adding the effect, we're adding the trigger, and if the trigger triggers, fire this effect, right? And this is kind of a basic framework. But in the future, the idea is lots of people might be able to build lots of things, including things specifically for a specific puzzle, maybe, and I would like to use it in the educational version of the app. It could even be as an automated hint system. It could be as I'd like to do things like encouragement. Hey, if somebody got stuck for a while, maybe ask them if they want a hint. And that could all be based on these triggers. There could be a trigger, user has been idle for X. User idle could be a trigger, and it just says if nothing has been entered for 200 seconds, or if the mouse hasn't moved, or whatever, right? So yeah, so these are how kind of these sorts of things come about, right? So there's potentially more behind it than the surface. The surface, it's just a neat little effect. But in reality, it's not about the effect. It's about the system it kind of tests, right? And we have a lot of different users. We have setters, we have puzzlers, we have hardcore users, we have people who just sort of follow along to YouTube videos and don't really use the app to actually solve themselves. We have people who don't care about YouTube and just use it almost like a puzzle book when they're on a plane and they just want to solve a few simple puzzles and things like that, For example, the fact that my app doesn't actually include any puzzles is quite unusual for Sudoku app. And personally, I'd love to cater for different kinds of playstyles. Like I personally, for example, I do like very casual plays. So for example, there is a Twitter account with a bot from a website called Sudoku Solver NL, and it posts several times, like every hour, every half hour, it posts these X Sudoku and Windoku and X4Q, window X Sudoku puzzles, and it posts these links, and it goes to their site. But personally, I don't like their user interface, right? So I have a little script that decodes their kind of. So in this case, you see it actually encodes the data also in the URL. So I have a little bookmarklet, and I can just say, Sudoku Solver NL to SudokuPad, and boom, it converts it to what I call the SCF format. And it's just a very compact format to implement very simple types of puzzles. So this URL does include all the data for this puzzle, just in a very compact format. And there it is, right? Now, I personally don't have an algorithm to generate them. I'm hijacking their algorithm, their little bot, and I'm not a puzzle setter, and I don't think I have the knowledge to build a good puzzle generating algorithm. I could maybe go about it, but I'm busy doing good user interfaces and things like that. But in the future, I'd love for there to be an opportunity for people not just to publish their own puzzles, but maybe they have a good algorithm and they just want to have an algorithmic daily Sudoku. And maybe it's even me. Maybe I hire somebody, or maybe I build my own algorithm, or find an algorithm, an open source one or whatever, create such a channel, and then somebody can use the app to get their daily kick-off simpler puzzles, maybe, or basic, there's random killer Sudoku. There are certain kinds of Sudoku that can be generated algorithmically. And on the other hand, there are a lot of puzzles out there. You know, the Logic Master Germany has over 12,000 puzzles. Of those, I'm sure there's a good number of relatively simple puzzles as well. So there might be, you know, by just categorizing and collecting them and making them available as structured collections. Here are, you know, killer Sudoku puzzles in this difficulty range. You know, some people, they go through them quickly, but for others, there might be already enough puzzles out there to last them as long as they want to be puzzling. So I think that's kind of a big, important sort of step forward eventually to kind of make puzzle publishing also effortless, just as effortless as actually solving is now already with the app. So with that said, let's have a look at the specific settings. I'm going to have a quick go over the main ones out here that aren't settings, just the buttons. We have the full screen, which I think has most use in mobile application. It might be useful for some streamers, but I think until I have more customizable layout options, that really won't do. We have the settings dialog, we have our rules, and this is something I'm actively trying to improve as well. So for example, we already have places now where I think if I reload this now, I think there are ways of having the rules show up. Let me see. Is it gameplay? Yeah, so I have don't pause on start on. So if this is off, it will actually go into pause, blur the puzzle, but show the rules. So it gives us the opportunity to read the rules and start the puzzle. And I'm tempted, very much tempted to make this the default behavior, basically improve this dialogue. For example, if you're already in the puzzle, it could tell you, hey, you're 3 minutes into this puzzle. Do you want to resume? You know, kind of make this the start screen, because right now there's no start screen. It just goes in the puzzle. And again, this is one of those things where there's ups and downs and pluses and minuses, depending on legacy and not legacy and all that. You know, people are have different opinions. Like, hey, you know, Logic Masters Germany has nothing to do with me. They've never talked to me. They might not even like me. I don't know. But they link to puzzles. And if now they're linked to a puzzle, instead of linking to the puzzle, links to a page that talks about the puzzle and says, hey, and by the way, support Sven, they might not be as happy to link to it. So I do want to keep it as bare and raw as possible, or at least make it available to the setters to choose, or even to the, you know, make it part of the link. Let them disable that, you know, go straight to the puzzle. In fact, I have been thinking about an embeddable version of the app. You know, what if a screenshot on Logic Masters Germany and you click on it and it just pops out the controls and you could just play it there without going to my site first? You know, it's a tough thing, because like from a technical perspective, it's an interesting challenge and something I'd like to see existing, but there's also good reasons why not doing that, right? We'll see. And I'm going to try not to get sidetracked that much, because I think, let me see, we are, let's see, how long has this stream been? And does it say anywhere? Does it say? Ah, it's about an hour. Okay. Maybe it's time to start talking about the settings then. Okay, so let me just finish. Yeah, we have the info button. That is something that is currently underutilized, and maybe I can use that in the future, or get rid of it, use the buttons for something else. We have the restart button, very important. I'm constantly thinking about rearranging them. I'm wondering if the rules button should be first, for example, and maybe this button should be further over to the side. Maybe it should have different layouts, different orders of buttons, depending on, you know, if you're on mobile or not. Maybe it should change them and learn how users use them. Maybe be configurable. I mean, these are all, from a usability design perspective, these are all questions I have. And I'm not well trained in usability, so I think I have good instincts for it, but I don't have any formal training, so I don't know how to form the question and how to make sure I'm answering it in the right way. Yeah. For the settings review, let me go see if I can make this a little bigger. Actually, let's give ourselves a little bit more space and a little bit less distraction. No. Don't go there. Yeah. And I think we can do without that for now. Does that cover the screen? Yeah, I think we're good with this. So let's have a look at settings. We have 7 categories now, and these categories I think Mark helped a lot because I just realized at some point that we just got too many settings. And I think I had a toggle for just hiding away some settings. But I realized it just was too much to navigate. The dialogue wasn't like, I didn't want to complexify. In fact, you see the dialogue is just really tall because it's a very sort of simple layout algorithm, which isn't really designed to work that great in this setting. Definitely space for improvement. But this was a quick way of kind of making the dialogue more or less infinite. It's not infinite, obviously, but I can easily add quite a few things without having to worry about restructuring it completely, and also maybe guiding people towards the most important things. So let's have a quick chat about the main categories. So we have tools, which is kind of the big, hey, do you want to use the pen tool? Do you want to have multi-letter? And it's actually, I didn't realize that still existed. So you can still disable multicolor mode. So you can actually disable multicolor mode. And the UI button doesn't actually change. But I do believe, yeah, so it only lets you press one button. But, and I didn't realize that, it does actually work with the multiple color palettes. So I think what multicolor mode off basically does, it just, every time you press a color button, it basically just erases whatever color's in the cell first before putting in the next thing. I think this is one of those things where I think I could probably retire this setting now. At the very beginning, when multicolor was new, there were probably some old timers who were like, hey, you know, this is new fangled stuff. I'm not used to it, you know. And even, you know, for most puzzles, it was taking some time to get used to. But I think we're so used to it now and seeing it and using it that I think it's probably okay to kind of just make it multicolor always, you know. It's a very subtle difference. I mean, the only real difference is that if I wanted to change this color, you know, I probably have to press delete first and then enter the new color. So it's like one extra click for probably what isn't the main use case, which is changing a color on a cell. Hey, Andy. That is actually interesting to know. So I didn't know that you actually edit it as HTML. So this is another problem, right? I have never set puzzles myself, and I haven't really interacted very much with these other sites. I have written scripts to scrape Logic Masters Germany, but I haven't actually published puzzles on it myself, right? And this is something I actually thought about earlier today. Is I've always been wanting to do a bit of a discussion type podcast about SudokuPad and Sudokus, but very few people from the kind of bigger channels are really interested in talking about the technical side very much, which is of course something I care about. But I'm thinking about maybe the other way around, that I would be the guest and they'd be the host. So maybe I'll talk to, you know, maybe Full Deck or some other puzzle setters, and hey, can you teach me how to set a basic killer cage puzzle in half an hour, you know? And kind of turn it into a little bit of a generic lesson of how to get started about setting puzzles, because I personally don't know how to set a puzzle. And I'd like to learn, even if I'm not getting good at it. I think I need to know just to understand the process from a perspective of usability. Like, hey, if I want to build an app that lets people set puzzles, I should know what it entails, you know? Like, I don't interact much with the back-end solver tools, and I don't like supporting them because I don't fully understand how exactly they're used and all this. I mean, I know intellectually, sure, but I don't know exactly how the constraints interact and how people, what the process of setting puzzles and so on and so forth, you know? So I think that's a very interesting thing for me personally to learn and to improve how I built the app, right? So yeah, we have the tools. The tools category is really, it's probably not the place where people spend a lot of time. Although I personally, for example, I don't like the extra press through the pen tool, and since the pen tool isn't always needed, I actually do like disabling it a lot of the time. I like to force myself to keep it open, because I realize that whenever I personally don't like to use something, it's because it's not good enough yet. And if it's not good enough yet, the only way to improve it is for me to use it and to be annoyed by it not being good enough. And the only way for me to realize what's wrong with it is by using it. So it's a little bit of one of those things. If I don't use a tool, like I'm not using dark mode because it's not good enough. So I should probably force myself to use dark mode, and then probably dark mode would get fixed. So yeah, so the main the main things here is the pen tool and the letter tool, I think. And to be honest, the letter tool now is almost to the point now where you could more or less ignore it. If you set it up in the right way, as long as you don't toggle to it, like, yeah, I can press, yeah, so for example, A, I can't even press A to put it on A because it's WASD is an alternate way for moving the cursor. But let's say I can, yeah, so I can press certain keys. Yeah, so the pen tool is probably doesn't need a full-on toggle on-off. It probably just needs the configuration for the hotkey. And I think that is currently under advanced. Letter tool hotkey, yeah. So this probably should go under tools. So here's like certain things that should be modified, right? And something like this stream for me talking about it will help me to actually understand this. And the letter tool has always been a bit of a problem because it interacts with basically all the keys on the keyboard, including all our hotkeys, right? So, we have Z, X, C, X, C, V, and B, and N and M potentially as well. So, for example, if we enable the, and I think this is under experimental, the replay tool, I think that would be under M. Yeah, so it takes just the bottom row of keys, right? Then, like we said, we have WASD for moving the cursor around. And then we have all sorts of hotkeys. So Control A for selecting everything. We have Control I for selecting the inverse. We now have Control C and Control V for copy and paste. So we have all these other hotkeys that interact with, Control, Alt, Shift, and so on. But that let you potentially prevent you from putting in an A. So if I put A, but if I do Control A in this case, actually uses a Control key to change to the center marking and then puts in an A anyways, right? Now if I put Control C here, it puts in a C, and if I put Control V here, it does both. It pastes and puts in a V as a center mark. So there's a lot of these interactions which are not desirable, but it's very hard to avoid them because, well, there's only so many keys on the keyboard and we're already used to using so many different hotkeys. And I personally made a mistake of trying to support multiple different ways of doing the same thing. So, for example, we have to change tools. We have the spacebar. We have Shift spacebar to go backwards. And you might not even see it properly. So, for example, from color to go back to center mark, I press Shift, which goes to corner mark. I press spacebar, which jumps to center mark. Now we're back to corner mark, and now release Shift, and we're in the corner mark. And the reason for that is we have temporary changing of tools. So the idea is I don't have to change a tool. I can press Shift and a digit to put in a corner mark. I can press Alt and a digit also to put in a corner mark. And I don't remember if this was user choice or Mac compatibility. I can press Control for a center mark, and I can press Control Alt for a color. And I think that's it for hotkeys right now. But of course, these also interact with, we have V for changing to color. We have Control V for pasting. And I don't know why I removed the 2 here. But we could potentially also have Control V and then typing in a letter V. So it's like, So this setting was kind of a way of deciding how we interact between hotkeys and managing the letters. So let's go through this actually. It's a bit out of order, but we're talking about the letter tool, right? So the default setting, I think 1 was the default, right? So the idea was, prior we used to be, you see, if I press Shift, it goes to corner. If I press Alt, it goes to letter. So I can press Alt to put in an A. I can press Shift to put in a corner mark. Except, right now, if I press A, it actually moves the cursor. But if I do Shift H, for example, or Shift... Shift goes to corner marks. So, with a digit. Now, Shift plus Alt lets me put in corner marks for letters. But I have to be careful because it might also interact with Windows hotkeys, which I can potentially not override being locked into a browser, right? So again, it might work for some people. And I initially tried a few different things. And I don't know, this is something I'd love to personally to start tracking some information about which settings are being used. But the truth is, most people probably don't understand how these settings work. And this is part of what I want to do videos about, So we have this first setting with using the Alt letter, the Alt key to temporarily switch to letters, and Shift temporarily switch to corner marks. We have hold Alt for hotkey. So the idea now is that if I press A, if I'm in letter mode, right, I press A, I put in an A. If I press Control A, I don't select everything. But if I press Alt Control A, then I select everything, right? So I add A as the modifier to be using the actual traditional hotkeys, right? And I think this depends on being in letter mode. When you're out of letter mode, Control A selects all, right? When we're in letter mode, by toggling here, Control A actually does center mark A, right? So that's the second setting. The third setting is similar to the first one, but with Shift and Alt swapped. Fourth is similar to the second setting, but using Shift instead of Alt. And then 5, I believe, means you basically have to toggle before you can do any letter stuff, right? So once you're toggled, you can just put in letters, and you can use letters just like anything else, right? And the hotkey for toggling is \. And I might switch that to tab because we're changing color palettes with tab. So that's actually an idea that tab should switch letters. I'm gonna put, that's, I think, a good enough idea to put it in our little to-do list. Use tab to toggle letter mode, like / and tab for color palettes. So I think that's you know, but as you can see, the whole thing might need a little bit of an overall improvement. And it's kind of, I don't like having all these different options, to be honest. Adding a letter like V when it isn't on the controls is a bit weird. Should there be a validation that the symbol you add are on the controls? No, not really. So there is kind of two ways of using the letters. One way is just using them as variable names, as substitutions for letters, for digits, right? In this case, you basically have one letter per digit on the keypad, and that's how you can use it on mobile. But since you have a keyboard, I didn't see any reason not to let people use all 26 letters. It's just not possible on mobile, right? And I don't think it's feasible to pop up a keyboard. I have considered a couple of options. There might be options such as doubling up the buttons, you know, just splitting them in half, making smaller buttons, or even, I think I've seen Sudoku clients out there that actually put up a little mini QWERTY keyboard, like as a hover thing. I could potentially, and this kind of depends on me rewriting how the layout for these controls work. But if I, you know, right now if I include the tools rows, we have 4 tall by 6 across, right? So that's already 32 buttons. Is it? 6 plus 6 is 12. No, it's 24 buttons, right? But we're very close to actually having, you know, full alphanumeric set. But then, of course, we're missing the buttons for tools. So it's like, do you want to have another press to toggle? Now you're pressing potentially 2 or 3 buttons, right? Another alternative would be to just have, just like the colors, you know, have 3 different palettes. So I could go here, press this 3 times, and get A through O, and then the second set, and then the third set. Michael is already jumping the gun, so this is where I'm getting to. There is all different ways of doing it, and I'm a programmer, so like I'd love to do all of them, right? But I'm also aware that the more option I give, the harder the application becomes to use, and it's not really what people want. People don't want all the options. They want the one option they want. The problem is they don't necessarily know what they want, and if they want it, it's not necessarily the best one for them. You know, if they want A, they might still prefer B if given B. So I also feel it's a little bit my responsibility to kind of give them the right option, even if, you know, they have a preference. But obviously not completely override their preference. There's some situations where the preference is perfectly suitable, right? Like, hey, you know, you want choices and so on and so forth, right? And one of the things that Michael just brought up is with a hotkey assigner is that, yes, I need a full key binding system because then I can fix some of the mistakes I've made in the past. So one of the mistakes I've made is just to let people do the same thing 3 different ways. And I think I started talking about that and I kind of lost the plot. So we have the bottom row of the keyboard, for example. We have Control, Alt, Shift, Control and Alt to kind of temporarily switch between the tools. We have spacebar and Shift spacebar to go backwards. And I don't know if there's another one. Maybe the scroll wheel should also switch tool, and that might actually be for mouse users. They might actually like that, you know, scrolling up and down to change tools, you know. Hey, it's Minecraft, right? And now that I said it, I actually personally like the idea. It's probably a bad idea, right? because again, it's not mobile friendly. And it's a fourth or fifth way of doing the same thing, right? And of course, that eats up hotkey space, that creates complexity, that adds more potential for adding settings and so on. So what I really need is a full key binding situation, right? I need a way for people to set up key bindings, similar to what you would do in a video game. And the key binding should include mouse. If somebody wants to change tools with the scroll wheel, scroll wheel up, wheel down, or right click or whatever, maybe they want right click to do something. It shouldn't be the browser pop-up. There's no reason for the browser pop-up menu to come here, right? Maybe middle click to do something. Maybe instead of selecting, middle click should do the smart select, right? Which currently happens with double click, things like that. But by creating a key binder, I put in a lot of effort to create the UI, but now I don't have to make the decision. And users hopefully will figure things out themselves. The truth is 99.9% of people will not modify their key bindings, right? And that's kind of the risk here. You're putting in a lot of effort for something that most people don't care about. There'll be still plenty of people who will not like the key bindings, even though they can change them, because they don't want to change them. They can't be bothered, or they don't know how, right? So it doesn't solve the problem, but it would help me to design things in a different way, right? So instead of hard coding things and trying to figure that out, I could use the key binder myself, and the idea would be that potentially, I would evolve the key bindings so that the default key binding is good over time by saying, hey, similar to what I tried to do with the color palettes. And right now I don't have the server support, but the idea would be people could, let's say there's a forum and people post their favorite key binding setup, right? And share them. Hey, if you use this key binding, you can do this much faster, or for speed setting, or blah, 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 right? And then kind of crowdfund the sort of layout. But again, the kind of people who change their key bindings are probably not the kind of people who use a key binding that's ideal for everybody. So there's a little bit of a issue there as well, right? But it definitely has its advantages. And again, it might be good enough to just add for my own use, so as I add new features in the future. Because for example, right now I have a problem. If I'm adding new features and I want to use a hotkey, what do I do? Do I change some of the hotkeys from the original one to free some up, Can I use a control key for something? I don't know, right? With a key binding thing, I don't actually have to make the decision. I just say, hey, key bind X, right? And then I have to add a key binding for that. But I, as the user now, will see, oh, that key binding will conflict with that. So I have to change that. But it's a decision I have to do in a different place, not as the creator of the plugin or the whatever, right? The plugin will just say, hey, this plugin has 5 things it can do, that it can do via a key press or an interaction. And it's up to the user to decide how that interaction happens, or the integrator to decide what the default key binding should be, right? And you're right, accessible is a big deal, because you can map key bindings to, to foot pedals, to other things, to buttons on a mouse. Somebody might have a fancy mouse with 10 buttons and not touch a keyboard, How key bindings work on a mobile device, but right now hotkeys don't work on a mobile device anyways. But, I don't know, there might be people out there that use mobile devices with some kind of Bluetooth controller attachment to control their phone from their wheelchair, things like that. So definitely, But yeah, the letter tool was kind of a big thing, and it's also was a sort of test case for certain other kinds of features in that same direction. People have been asking for corner marked colors and things like that. To be honest, colors are supposed to be kind of corner markings. That's why we have multiple colors. And I personally have thought about it. Oh, do we want to have little boxes in the corners with colors? Yeah, There's also something about adding too much stuff where just, in theory, it sounds nice to have it, but then in practice, if you have too many things together, none of them work properly anymore. So it's actually bad to have too many things, right? So yeah, and it definitely makes sense to maybe move the hotkey into the tools section. Yeah, let me add that here. Move hotkey setting into tools section. I think it makes a lot of sense to have it there, because people might be looking for that. And instead of enable letter tool, we could just have a 0th setting for hotkeys, which just says, hide letter tool altogether. Some people might just say, hey, I never use them. I don't even want the button there because I accidentally press it on my phone or whatever, right? So that is, I'm gonna double check myself here, because I think I just spent, where's the stream time? 18 minutes ago. So I spent 20 minutes on one setting, more or less. We're gonna have to pick up the pace here. And did I? No, I didn't see another chat message here. All right. Again, let me know if there's any issues with audio. Let me know if there's anything off the screen in any way. And feel free to send me any questions or comments in the chat. Ooh, I think we've covered the tool section now. The multicolor mode toggle, like I said, is almost not used anymore. And I probably can remove that, free up some space, reduce some complexity. We've got the pen tool that definitely still warrants a toggle, especially since right now that's the primary way of adding or removing a button. And the reason the replay tool, which is actually a tool, and by tool I mean one of these buttons, is that it's not really super functional. And I need one of these days I'll re-tackle it. It was kind of an early implementation. I think it still functions, but it deserves better, you know. And now that I have the replay save and load and the animation creation tool, which we get to soon, it makes sense that the whole replay tool gets a complete reamp, and you know, and it lets, you know, because right now, for example, it overrides the current replay. So if while you're using the replay, if anything happens, you just lost your replay data, you know. So it's really not a good way of doing it. All right, that's the tool section, section 1. And it's mostly the first one because it's kind of the big thing, like, hey, I want to switch the tool on and off. I'm changing the layout of buttons. Do I need the tool? Yes, no, you know. The next one is the visual section. So this is kind of, it doesn't affect the gameplay very much. And it's kind of like, it changes how things look. And there's a couple of things that fall into the category. So we have large digits that basically affects, let's do a couple of things. So we have a large one here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 here. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4 here, and maybe a long one here, like that. And yes, we can kind of see this, right? The large digits basically mostly affect, I think they slightly affect the size of the normal digits, but they mostly affect the position of the corner digits. And this was a reaction to killer cage totals, which are in large digit mode, they're basically covered. And I don't know what people use most. Is another one of those things I'd like to do analytics on. Personally, I prefer having large digits on phone especially. I like the look of the larger digits, makes them easy to see. But I definitely want them off for killer cage puzzles because they overload them. And I've looked into moving the corner digit out of the way, insetting it inwards. I've done all sorts of things. And people always say, oh, you should just do it that way. And then when you do it, they say, oh, I don't like that. Don't do it that way. So I've gone back and forth on a bunch of those. And I'll probably re-tackle that sometime in the future. And maybe it'll be another one of those multiple settings. Because we could, you know, I think the Crack the Cryptic mobile app does that. And I think the old app did that. Some apps do that where if there's a killer cage total in the cell, it actually starts the one in the one position over and it skips that corner position. I tried just indenting that one digit, but it looked weird if it looked different between a cell with a total and a cell without. And on top of that, it's not entirely guaranteed to fully identify killer cage total. It's pretty good. Killer cages are one of those very old features that are well specified. But nobody's being stopped from actually putting a small digit in a corner of a cage that has of a cell that has nothing to do with killer cages, but still also would be hidden by this, you know, and just doing general, hey, are there any other text elements that overlap with this digit kind of checks. You know, it's one of those things. Yeah. Anyway, that's the large digit mode. I think this one is worth having as a toggle because, oh, and to be fair, I've often considered that this should be automatic for killer cage puzzles. So probably what this will become in the future would be a tri-state setting where there'll be an on, off, and auto setting. And in auto setting, basically, if there are any killer cages, it'll go into small digit mode. There's something maybe to be said to do small digits only on the cages that are killer cages, but then you have, you know, imagine you have a row of cells, and you know, one of them has the large digits and the one next to it has small digits because there's killer cage total. It'll look weird and maybe messes with scanning and things like that. Keypad flipped, we mentioned this earlier, that basically inverts the top and bottom row on the keypad. So we either have the 1 at the bottom or we have the one at the top. So that's kind of phone layout versus computer layout. I don't know if I have a preference. I think the default is phone layout, but some people complain that it doesn't match the keys on their keyboard. So if they don't look and they press the upper left corner, they get a 7 instead of a 1, right? Yeah, that's what we're here for. In fact, I think large digit mode used to also enlarge the regular digits, but I think over time I actually reduced the differences. And you can see that the central digits actually already change size depending on how many digits there are. So the large digit mode, I think, does a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. But the funny thing is, large digit mode enlarges the larger ones, but actually makes the small ones smaller. So there's something weird with the spacing. Or, you know, it shouldn't be doing that. It probably, at that smaller size, it probably shouldn't change them. So it's not a perfect thing. It's one of those things that kind of, you know, I'm not a mega corporation with teams and meetings and committees. You know, I just kind of fiddle with things, and then something bothers me, I'll change it quickly, and then somebody complains and I'll change it again. And, you know, a lot of this stuff has a lot of history. Hide colors. Hide colors, I believe, is very specific for background colors, and I'm noticing it doesn't actually change these. So let's have a quick look at one of the test puzzles, because I believe it was very specifically built for something like this. So I think it just affects these kind of colors, yeah. And for example, there is a setter who publishes a newsletter every week. The oh my god, the artisanal Sudoku newsletter on Substack, right? Let's see, artisanal Sudoku, artisanal Sudoku, yeah. So James Sinclair, in his newsletter, and let's have a current look at this one, he publishes 2 links for a shaded and an unshaded version of the puzzle. And this mode, I think it predates me seeing his newsletter, but it basically, it kind of, I wonder if he's doing that because he just doesn't know, right? In fact, since all settings can also be affected by the URL, he could literally make a link and then add that. So for example, the way that works is every setting, and this, again, this is something I need to document. Every setting has a class associated with it on the HTML elements, right? So we look at the HTML element, right? And you see setting dash selection cage, setting dash whatever, right? And these basically is just a generic thing I'm doing for all settings, but some of the settings are literally just style sheet changes. And I think that, you know, so we have setting hide colors, and I think the hide color setting is one of them. So let's have a look here. If we look at the layer with the colors, which I believe is the underlay here, there should be, yeah, setting dash hide colors, underlay rectangle, and it does some checks. So it's trying to exclude certain things. So for example, it checks if rounded is not true. So it, for example, excludes the colors of circles, things like that. But here fill opacity 0, right? So it's this style basically that does it. And every setting can be added as a URL argument, right? So if we go back to, of course, I've just changed the CSS. Yeah, so here the setting is currently disabled. So if I add an, whoops, so setting dash hide colors equals 1, it should change the setting. I think it will change it in my actual local settings. So if I remove that, no, okay, so it does a temporary change. So the idea is that somebody like Simon, he can just add this here in the URL in his link, and he basically can just link to this version without actually generating 2 separate versions of the puzzle, right? Now, it might still be worthwhile for him to do that because here he has an fpuzzles link to both version. Yes, yeah. So I think this is unshaded fpuzzles, yeah. So obviously in fpuzzles, he'd still need the second version. But in the future, if I have my own listing and database of puzzles, I can actually add an unshaded link that just works. It's not necessarily perfect because here in this case, the shading is artistic. It's kind of just for guiding the eye, and it looks pretty. Same with here. But of course, let's say if the rules say red cells are this, then hiding the red for those cells isn't necessarily what you need. So anyway, it's probably not a setting a lot of people use, but for some settings, for usability purposes, it might be useful. And I need to speed it up. These are way too long. I don't want to necessarily turn every one of these settings into a 1-minute YouTube short video, but some of these should fit multiple into a 1-minute YouTube video. And currently, I think I'm averaging like 10-20 minutes per setting. So let's get on with it. Hide timer. Some people just don't like the timer ticking away in the corner. Things like that in the future, I'd love to make them more intuitive. Maybe if you hover over it, it gives you a little, or if you select it, and then maybe here is a hide timer setting or something, I don't know. And then up here, but then, then you have something else showing there. So yeah, but I'd like to, some of these settings, I'd like to actually integrate more with the user interface directly rather than just having a generic toggle here in a list somewhere. Dash grid. So this was requested a while ago for certain kinds of puzzles. I think this was something standard on Penpa. I just added it. I don't like fully know which kind of puzzles and how they work and so on. And I don't think it's used very much. And I think when it's used as a URL toggle. One thing I definitely want to implement in the future is that all of these settings can also be toggled by the puzzle data itself. That might make sense for Penpa import and so on. But again, it's a bit dodgy because things like fpuzzles might not know about these settings. So it's kind of a, that's dash grids is really just the visual look of the grid itself. And it doesn't affect region borders. So if you want a dashed puzzle, you basically cannot have regions as part of it as well. Outlines on elements. I don't know if we're going to see this, and I think it only interacts with actual colored cells, right? So yeah, I think that'll work. So the blue lines here, if we now click on outlines on elements we don't see anything. I'm not sure what affects this. Outlines on elements. So it doesn't affect everything. So if we look at that V over this green background cell and we switch this on, the V actually has a white outline. And in certain places, it'll make it easier to see. And I think it's specifically for line puzzles, like puzzles that have long lines that overlap with colored cells. And I don't actually have a good example for that. But it's one of those little usability things. And I think Simon has used it recently. I think it does affect coloring cells yourself. So for example, if we have something like this arrow Sudoku, and if I just do a Control-A red, yes. And it really improves visibility, but it's something I've added more recently, and I think some testing is required still, and it's not perfect, and it's a bit of a fiddly thing. It doesn't apply for all elements evenly. Like, for example, if we look at these arrows, it doesn't have straight corners, and so it's not something I like to advertise, but it's probably a mistake because, it actually would work for some people. Yeah, and it used to do some screwy things with Thermos because the circle was separate from the line. And there's some fixing some improvements that are still possible. Let's put it that way. Again, it's maybe I need an accessibility setting. I don't know. Having them in here under settings, I don't know. I'd love to improve this whole thing by being able to include with each setting a line of text describing it and having kind of a normal mode where the settings are spaced out more, where there's more space, more less density in the settings dialog, and just that text, that line of description against each setting is visible here. And then maybe you have an expert mode where you hide them and make it more compact, right? Draw arrows above lines. So this is a bit of and in fact, yeah, it needs a reload. I added that because there were some conflicts in how fpuzzles and SudokuPad handles elements. So in SudokuPad, there are basically, because it's based on the original software by Sam. I kind of fake them to kind of make them universally applicable by redrawing the same element multiple times, I think, or drop shadow or something. There's something weird, and it's not easy to do. So for example, here, that the pill and the line doesn't have an interrupting line across it to make it work that way. So it's kind of a trade-off. Whoops, wrong button. The draw arrows above lines. It basically swaps where arrows go relative to lines on Z ordering. And the reason for that is because in the original software, we had these arbitrary layers, the underlay, the overlay. There was I think I added that a layer for arrows and lines just mixed together. And then I think they were drawn in order, right? While on F puzzles, for example, the layering, the Z ordering is by kind of element, right? So all the therms are always beneath a certain thing or whatever. And it's a bit of a conflict because SudokuPad doesn't deal in features. It deals in visual elements. So it doesn't know something's a thumb or an arrow or whatever. And it doesn't really, I don't really do anything fancy trying to figure out if two lines are on top of each other and one is thicker than the other and which one would hide which and so on. And I could do all sorts of things. But there's a fundamental differences of how the data is handled. So I just added that quickly in because some puzzles I think one was hiding the other. But I couldn't just universally swap these two layers because other things then would break. Because other puzzles use the same elements in different ways. Again, this might be one of those things that if I could add it as a setting in the puzzle, it might be more useful than as a setting in the app. It doesn't really belong in the app, but it was a solution to certain puzzles just not working at all in the app because, you couldn't see the elements. So that's what this does. And I keep forgetting that reloads the page because it actually and maybe I can improve on that. Maybe nowadays I have more tools in place to actually dynamically, because I think it redraws the puzzle from scratch where things get targeted, but I might be able to create an algorithm that actually pulls the elements out and puts them in different places. Can I implement arrow/line orders setting without page reload? It's not necessarily something I should be doing, but it's something I can ponder if I could do. All right. Hey, Giorgio. Thanks. Nice to hear that. This is a overly detailed behind the scenes view. I'm currently seeing a weird outline here. I don't know if it's visible on the stream, but there's a darker red, thick line overlapping with this gray. It's as if there's a gray square that's smaller than this gray square. And I don't know where that comes from. Let's see if we can track down. Let's make this as big as we can. Let's do it like this. Ooh, this was too big. Because my stream doesn't actually cover my whole screen, so I have to be careful that I don't push things off screen. So if I look at these elements, so by the way, on the technical side, this is all an SVG. The render is basically SVG based, so it's just pushing elements into an SVG thing, right? So these gray boxes would be here. And you can see they fill in this whole thing, but I don't understand why the cell colors create this sort of outline effect. And this could be related to the line coloring, but outlines on cells is off. So this is very bizarre. I don't know. I wonder, there is a stroke on these. Maybe. I'm wondering if the fact there's a 0.5 stroke on these gray boxes is the reason we're seeing this kind of... Because these boxes are underneath the red. So it could be that the stroke... no, but the stroke width is 0. Huh. And it's none. I don't know. I don't know where that weird outline comes from. Let's see if I delete these. Yeah, I'm still seeing it. So there's a dark red line and then a slightly gray version of it over there. Wait a second. Is there... Because I think in the past I've... what is that? Oh, those are the diagonal lines, right? Because I think in the past I had to duplicate whole layers into another position to deal with certain things. So, here we go. Cages. Okay. So that is interesting. So the Vindoku here is implemented in two elements. It has the gray underlay, but it also has a cage, which is supposed to not have any styling, but it actually does have styling. So if I delete the underlay here, let's just delete that one. There's actually a faint cage here. And that's why we, okay. I don't know why it's like that. So, you know, I don't know if that's something that should be fixed. If I should get rid of the gray underlay and then just have the Vindoku cage rendering. Because the cages are above arrow. So here's one of these situations, right? The cage has to be transparent because it's above certain elements. But if it's too transparent, you don't really see it. And I don't actually see where the color of this cage comes from. Ah, yeah. So here, the opacity is part of the color. So if we make this less transparent, the problem is if we make it untransparent enough to be as dark as these, it might color, yeah, it would cover up the red here. So it's one of those things where the render order is actually problematic, where the cage background should have a separate layer beneath certain other elements, such as the cell colorings. And that's something I currently don't really support well. Yeah, but the yellow is very specifically smaller than the cell, right? So it doesn't, so you can see certain features behind it, and it doesn't interact with certain things. But one of the problems I have is that certain visual elements should actually exist on 2Z depth at the same time. You want something that's behind something else and something, you know, like a frame that's covering, let's say, the background color, like the selection blue frame covers the background color. But then you would a background that doesn't, in this case, we want that gray that doesn't color, that doesn't cover the cell coloring, right? So this guy, you know, this guy's on top of the green while this guy's below, except it's both on top and below because it's two separate elements, right? Yeah, it's never easy, never easy. And maybe there are, you know, I don't know how, you know, maybe there are sort of theoretical ways of dealing with Z ordering and how you should organize objects in a DOM that have multiple, you know, that exist at different Z levels at the same time, you know, that surround something in front and behind. But I don't know. Like, as far as I know, things like DOMs are very strictly hierarchical with a singular Z ordering for all elements, right? So, yeah, that's a gap in my personal knowledge that I might have to dig into sometime. 3D effect. All right. We're 2000. You know, I developed my aesthetics in the mid 90s when I was building video games in assembly. So it's very much kind of one line of pixels is all you need for a 3D effect in my mind. So draw orders above lines. So next item, show row column labels. That's actually a super easy one. It literally just adds numbered values. I say easy, but there's always a little element of complexity. So this was something asked for by YouTubers very specifically because it helps them communicate with their audience. You know, they can say, hey, row 1, column 1, you know, it's here. Row 5, column 5, or whatever. The issue came in when we had weird grids like this one, where are the rows and columns? So I'm saying, in this case, it starts from here to here. But how does my system know that, right? Because the puzzle does not contain any such information. What it does contain is this region, the singular region that covers these cells. And basically what my algorithm does, it says, hey, you know, find me the smallest rectangular area that contains all cages and regions in the puzzle. And I'm going to consider this area the active zone, right? Right now, if I press Control A, it actually selects everything. And maybe Control A should actually only select this area. But if I put digits in everything, it only marks these as wrong. So this region is actually used by the conflict checking. And it's also used by the row column system. But it recently had a problem. So there's a video by Correcting the Cryptic from a couple of days ago where they had two grids side by side. And it's this one. And I hope this doesn't give me a copyright strike. But yeah, basically this puzzle. And we had the problem that the algorithm or penpod, the penpod importer, basically told it, hey, this puzzle has a 6x6 region over here. And that caused the conflict checker to ignore the right side. So it only checked the solution against this area, and anything you put on the right, on the other side, it didn't matter. Everything was correct. So I'm now also including the solution itself. So it basically scans the solution, finds the leftmost value, the topmost value, because the solution can also contain blanks, right? So for example, in this puzzle, the solution, now this particular puzzle doesn't have a solution in it, but the solution should have all dots in this area and should just ignore the values in this area. So even with the solution, this puzzle still should correctly identify the active region. There are some puzzles like chaos construction puzzles, you know, those puzzles where you have to find, you know, it's a slightly bigger area, you have to find where the 3x3s go, that are tough to tackle. But if they have a solution, the system should figure that stuff out. Yeah, so, you know, like in this case, these are inside the grid clues, right? And there is some issues with overlaps potentially, but it's not really been a big deal. Like, let's see if we look at this one. I've kind of made them small enough that generally they don't interfere. I think even little killer clues, I think, don't interfere with them because they're much bigger. You know, these are relatively small and maybe not super, like you wouldn't really use them on mobile, you know. And I think they don't move the position of the board, so we don't have a layout issue with them. I think there are some circumstances where the top one might overlap with the upper bar somehow, but generally I think it's working pretty well now. And this was one of those little features that very few people will really use, but YouTubers found a use for it. And I think some people like, you know, solving with it for their own note-taking or whatever, you know, the advanced puzzlers. There's an issue with background in the row column. Probably. I don't have a puzzle with background graphic as a... Oh yeah, the 6x6 here is also a nice one to show problems with it. So... wait, these aren't... Yeah, so... Oh, 1 second, what's going on here? These numbers are supposed to be there? Oh, yes, they are. Okay, never mind. So it still kind of works. They might mess up where background colors work. If you, like, I'll put a note. Row call interfere with VG image. So we have potential problem where it changes the shape of the SVG and changes therefore the positioning of background images. Again, it's not a very much used image, but you know, everything can have potential knock-on effects. Even the simplest features. Hey, put some numbers next to rows and columns, and so many features, so much work just to get something that simple to work properly under all circumstances. It's always yeah, it shifts the background image, so it probably shouldn't. That's probably something I should fix. Mark, how has nobody ever said that? Like, this is the first time I've heard of it, and I don't use background images very much. I don't see it very much, and I don't use the, you know, those row column labels, so I don't see the errors with them. And that's a problem I have with testing. I cannot test everything. That's why I often rely on people sending in issues. I have the beta version, but not enough people are using it. So in the future, I would like to, once I've done the server move, I might do something like maybe align it with, because to be fair, the largest user base I have is still YouTube videos by Cracking the Cryptic. So I might say, okay, the furthest from a video release for 1 hour every day, I redirect people to the beta version, or for 10 minutes or for half an hour, you know, so the beta version gets a bit of a workout and I get responses, you know. Or maybe I'll just pop out a little thing, hey, dude, would you like to help test it? You know, you can view this puzzle on the beta version, and then have a button for reporting issues or something. That's definitely something I would like to do. Again, a lot of work to set it up, but once I've set up, maybe it'll save me some time and effort. Fog of War animation. So we'll need a Fog of War puzzle, and I think the Bremster one from earlier might do the trick. Bremster. Yeah. So let's open that Fog of War from earlier. And I just saw it flash in without the fog. And that definitely shouldn't happen. And that was fixed. And I have a feeling that my recent optimization broke that, because I think I added something to show the puzzle quicker, and that's actually messing up fog puzzles. And again, I just noticed that no reports of this. Because this is something I changed not too long ago, where I realized it waits for the full replay to play before showing a puzzle, and it could add a couple of seconds of delay where the page just seemed frozen. And I said, oh, you know, I could put a loading spinner, or I could show the puzzle before the replay and then add the replay as soon as that's available. And it'll make the perceived wait time much shorter. But apparently this kicks in, it shows the puzzle before fog rendering kicks in. So fog renders too late due to early render of pre-replay puzzle. I'll know what that means, but that's definitely something that needs fixing because it'll spoil fog puzzles. By the way, very good puzzle by Bremster. I think Simon did a video on this yesterday. Play it. It's not too hard. Definitely worth watching. I am going to spoil a little bit of that. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm just going to uncover a few cells and basically show off the fog of animation. I think this has to be a 1 or a 2. So yeah. So if I put in a 1 here, it just uncovers the fog. With fog animation, I personally like it. It just fades them in and out. Small thing, but I feel like it's the sort of thing that just makes it feel a little bit better. But I don't know if it's worth the technical effort, because there's a lot of effort gone in to make that work smoothly, to make it work under all circumstances, to make the animation not... Like, if you're typing in characters, digits too quickly, how does the animation react if the animation hasn't been finished yet and it's fading in or out the next cell, etc., etc., etc. To make sure it doesn't reveal characters it shouldn't reveal while it's animating, which cells are rendered how. For example, right now, conflict checking depends on the fog, if cells are hidden or not, and Mark did a lot of contributions on that. How does the animation interact with that? So it's a very small, simple thing that can really roll into a lot of complexity, and nobody asked for this. This is something I wanted to do and I thought would be nice, and I'd like to have more animation in the app. Hey Shelby, how are you doing? Welcome to the stream. Simon found it. I watched it and I didn't notice him finding something, but now that you mention it, maybe there was something and I thought about marking it down and I forgot about it because my brain works like that. I need to rewatch the video then. I don't... Did he though? Do you remember what the issue was, Andy? I think he mentioned the question marks, but obviously they're there to hide to push the digits off screen, so you don't see the, that. So the question marks in the quads are there to ensure that the quad digits are only revealed under certain circumstances from the fog. I did get an email though about the rendering of the quad digit sizes. So I think on iOS or on iPad or Safari or something, they're pushed up. I remember looking at that in the past. I'm gonna make a note of this. I thought I'd fixed it, but maybe I broke it again. Fog, no, not fog. Quad clues render too high on iOS and / or Safari. That's definitely something I need to look in. And you see, this is a to-do list I've built just now. And I have, this is whole file as a to-do list, and I have a whole list of files of to-do lists. And that's why I never get anywhere, because everything is just big and more and problematic and mouse moving, I think, around a half visible quad. Mouse moving. What do you mean, mouse moving? Selecting? Or just literally just moving the mouse? Huh. If you could find the timestamp in the video, that would really be nice. Then I don't have to find it. Let's continue on the settings. Oh, by the way, yeah, another one of those weird things that I'm strangely proud of. Nobody else cares, but it actually stores which which groups here are open. So you can, I can close this, and I can go over here, and I can open the settings, and that'll be closed, and I can open this one, and I can go back here, close it, open it, and that'll be open. Not super important, but it's definitely something, the kind of little quality of life stuff that I like to add. The rendering of the quad, when he was quickly highlighting... In the fog or out of the fog? Yeah, it was rendering. Mouse, I think. If you find the timestamp, let me know and I'll take a look. So that's fog of war animation. I got to get through these quicker. We're not even. We're still on the second section. Hide background image. that, again, this is something we have advanced, add background image. So we have a way of adding background images. So I have these weird like semi-editing features, and I should probably group them. Except that the hide background image might also make sense for users. Again, I don't have a background image enabled puzzle right now. I think there was one Simon did very recently on the channel. Because I remember, I don't think, actually, no, maybe it wasn't on the channel. Maybe it was a Patreon puzzle, and he asked me to apply the background. I can probably find that. I won't show it on the screen for very long because it's a Patreon reward. I'm just gonna scroll back quickly, see if I find it. Simon just asked me to add. Yeah, it was a Mario puzzle. I think. I think it's this one. Yeah. Don't look at this because it's a Patreon only one, but basically we have these little icons here, and the hide background should hide that. Yeah, no background image. And it's gone. Don't rewind or whatever, you know, that's their Patreon stuff. So that's the background image. It's literally just for puzzles that have background images, of which there are very, very few, and it's a underdeveloped feature. It should probably, maybe it shouldn't be here. This is the sort of thing, maybe it should be under advanced because it's something that most people wouldn't even know. And I wonder, maybe it shouldn't even be visible, the setting, if a puzzle doesn't have a background image, because people will click this and not know what's happening, right? Because nothing is happening. And that's all the visual stuff. So it's a bit of a mixture between actual visual elements on the screen, mostly things that, you know, timer, that don't affect playing, you know, do you want that kind of sort of semi-edit the puzzle for visibility, right? Like, for example, in this puzzle, if you hide the background colors, well, the puzzle rules don't apply anymore. And this was before they had the ability of adding rules to the puzzles. So this doesn't actually have the rules included. All right, let's move on to the next category. Around 2021, 2023, this was, did I have that video open? So this was, what was this puzzle called? Endeavor, yes. So around 2020. I'm not going to look at it on stream, though, because that will spoil the puzzle, and we don't want that. Thanks for finding that. So I'm going to put a note of that in my to-do list here. Quad rendering issue visible in video at I'm going to put both times here because I don't know which of you guys is more accurate. All right. Nope. This should be, yeah, I can save that. All right, let's go on to the gameplay section, and let's go a bit faster. Don't pause off on start. Basically, and it's a bit of a weirded version, but basically I've always been wanting to add a pop-up when you start with the rules and like a splash screen, and basically lets you control when the timer starts, or when you want to start looking at the puzzle. And basically this just disables it. I don't like the fact that it's worded this way. It should probably be the other way around. At that time, I didn't have a good way of implementing default settings, so it was always defaulting to off. So I needed to have an inverted setting name, but that's basically just doing that. That gets rid of that. It doesn't pause. It doesn't start with the puzzle paused. You get the puzzle and immediately it's running. This might actually be a setting that's important to some people, and they might just not want that extra click. But it could also be one of those settings that I should just get rid of, and I just always have a little splash with the rules for the puzzle before you start the puzzle. All right, check on finished. So this is basically when the puzzle is full, do we run a check? So if I set this to off, Control A and put a 1 in, the conflict trigger shows it as red, but it doesn't actually say, hey, this puzzle is wrong. If I press the check button, it gets this, right? If check and finish is on, and I just put 1s in everything, I think check on finish might actually only work if there's a solution. Or maybe it only works if there's no conflict. Let me see. Yeah, this, no, this will, I don't want to spoil it. Oh, I need a puzzle that actually has a solution. So that means a modern puzzle. So let's just go to a puzzle from a few days ago. Maybe one of the... you know what? Let's just go to maybe today's gas. That might be a good one to use for testing. It might spoil it, but it'll be just today's gas, right? That's all right. And I'll go to my local version. Yeah, so that's today's gas. Let's make sure the setting is check unfinished on. So if I Control A and press 1, so it doesn't do that. So, okay, so the check unfinished is, it only kicks in if you have, I think, a correct solution, or if you have a potentially correct solution without the conflicts. That's interesting. Yeah, but basically it just says, hey, you type in the last digit and it's correct, it pops this up, or it's incorrect, it pops this up as well. But as you can see, I don't fully know exactly how it works. It doesn't just check when all the digits are filled in. So it has a couple of conditions, not to give you sort of false checks and all this stuff. Personally, I have it on. Simon always has it off. But again, with Simon, you never know if it's because he doesn't know it exists or if it's because he doesn't like it. I think he doesn't like it. I think he likes, you know, being able to look it over manually and not just being told, hey, you're wrong or right or whatever. I think for most sort of kind of more casual players, they'd probably want it off. They probably want it on. But it might make sense for YouTubers or for hardcore players or for people who kind of are used to kind of more old style pencil and paper type play, where they want to manually go over the puzzle and look at it to have it off. Yeah, and I think at that time it was still broken. So it probably because it has the... Yeah, but like, again, I think because he had a correct solution and it was that the checking was broken at the time, so it ignored everything on the right half of it. Yeah, it's all right. Again, everything here is a little bit more complex than it seems. There's very few settings here that are actually genuinely simple. Conflict checker. So this used to be just on and off, but I got some issues. Like I added some features. So for example, it was starting to do knights and kings move checks and things like that. And some people didn't like that. So we have a classic Sudoku setting now, which used to be called simple. That excludes some of those rules, and it's mostly classic Sudoku, but it's actually no guarantee. I think it might actually include certain killer cage checking, maybe. Where was our SCF puzzle from earlier? SCF. Oops. Like if I look at this one, and I clear this, right? So we now have check pencil marks on. So for example, you can see on these yellow markings that it can see cells down the diagonal. So we have a 3 on this diagonal. So if I put a 3 here, it's red. Now if I switch this, and this is in classic checker. So classic checker is not strictly a classic checker. Personally, that's why I didn't want to call it that. I want to call it simple checker. So it's a bit of a, classic checker probably makes more sense to people, but it's actually not accurate. Mark was asking me about that. So this is one of those things. The system generates automatic cages. So this is basically a killer cage, a 9-cell killer cage. And the classic checker still checks cages because it doesn't actually know anything about rows and columns. Rows and columns are just automatically generated cages. It doesn't differentiate them. It's something I should look into. Nobody's complained yet, probably because it's very niche, and I'm the only one who does these kind of puzzles very regularly. But I'm going to make a note. Should classic checker exclude killer cages, x Sudoku etc. The problem is that internally I make these conversions where the system doesn't actually necessarily know anymore what kind of feature it is and doesn't really care about classic Sudoku. There's no such thing. It's just, hey, a region is just a 3x3 cage, killer cage with a sum of 45 that happens to live here, you know, with a particular kind of... and that's my problem. I have a mental hang up on that. I want to foundationally have the system treat things as similar as possible so I don't have to implement a lot of code. But of course, to the users, they want to differentiate between a killer cage and a region or a box or a line or a row, whatever. And then off just doesn't do that kind of checking. So if I put corner marks here, they won't get marked red despite that one there. On they'll be marked red, and on classic they would also be marked red because then the row and the column and so on and so forth. I think it's mostly right now excluding the the chess rules, right? Check pencil marks, yeah. So that's it'll mark a 1 here, but it won't mark the one corner marks here. And again, all of this checking stuff eventually should probably be in its own section, maybe combined into a singular one. I don't know. It could be off, on with corner marks. You know, it could be a severity of checking setting. I don't know. Again, corner marks is one of those things. The pencil mark checking, it's not just corner marks, center marks as well. Something that some YouTubers leave off. Simon has it off. I personally love it. I have it on. Yeah, a lot of this might be just terminology thing, and that's the thing. I'm not the arbiter of terminology, so I think right now the biggest problem I have is a lot of people don't know these settings even exist, let alone what they mean. And I don't have a good channel of communicating it. Just that's my failing. You know, there's no detailed documentation, there's no descriptions, and this stream is my beginning of my effort to actually improve the situation. So I would like to have this stream. It is a bit of a rambly mess, but maybe eventually I can publish some timestamps. Hey, in this stream on that timestamp, I'm talking in great detail about this thing. And if some things aren't clear yet, or if maybe the stream evokes some questions, then I know what people worry about, what they care about, what they wonder about, and then I can do a specific video. Hey, and I'd love to do this. I'd love to do a YouTube short. Hey, check pencil marks. What does it mean? It does this, this, and this. It doesn't do this. Boom. Conflict checker. It's called classic Sudoku, but it actually checks cross marks. If you don't like it, let me know. Maybe we'll change it. You know, that kind of thing. So mark solved digits is basically if all the ones are placed. And I think I can simulate it by just putting ones into everything. Yeah. So now you see the 1 is grayed out. And there's 3 settings: off, which just, you know, doesn't do that. And I think it works on all of these correctly now. I've been bouncing around with that a little bit. So on, if I remove a 1, or let's say remove all the ones from this box, that is interesting. So it found that I selected 9 ones, and I've selected more than 9 ones. So it's graying that out because it says, hey, you've got more than 9 ones in the puzzle, but it doesn't actually check that the ones are correct or not. And that's something I don't actually know how to handle. Like, this puzzle doesn't include a solution. I don't know if this puzzle is supposed to have only 9 ones. I don't actually know how many ones it's supposed to have without a solution. So without a solution, it just goes by the count. So you see now there are less than 9 ones, now there are 9 ones, and it marks it. With a solution, I think it works better. So for example, I think this one has a solution. So if I do this, it still marks them because I've marked them all. But if I unmark all of these, that's a 1 given. If I unmark one of these, I think in this case it should work better. It shouldn't say this, you've solved it, because it knows you have not actually marked all the ones that you need. So that's actually, I think, is a bug. Show marked cells does not correctly account for given solution. So that's something I'd like to improve. Again, it's one of those things that probably nobody is bothered by, because most people don't solve like this or don't expect this to work correctly in these situations. But I personally would like it to work more correctly, and partially because it's those sort of algorithms, those sort of bits of code I might use for other things. So just to clarify, the button gets marked if you finished solving all digits, but it doesn't work correctly if you're putting in the wrong digit, right? So if I put 9 ones in here, it just marks it, even though those aren't the correct number of ones. The other setting, which is gradual, oh, in fact, yeah. So on basically just says, hey, you know, as I'm adding ones, so I've got, how many ones do we have? We have 4 ones. So it thinks we need 5 more. So 4, 5, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I miscounted 9, right? So now it toggled to all ones solved. Gradual looks at the number of ones. So it slowly approaches them. And I don't know it takes givens into consideration. So I think I fixed that recently. So normally it would already show these as partially solved, but instead what it does, it says, actually you need 5 more. So it says 1 of 5, 2 of 5, 3 of 5, 4 of 5, 5 of 5. And now the 1 is marked as solved, right? Despite the givens. And I think the 2s will, it goes wider and wider and wider. And the nice thing about this is as you're solving a puzzle, it kind of gives you a quick indication of which digits are almost solved. And I actually kind of like that because you can kind of go in and know, oh, okay, this one is almost solved. So let me double click and see which ones are missing, that kind of thing. If it works correctly right now by ignoring givens is actually an odd question because, most people would consider this as 3 9s in the cell, in the puzzle, and this 4 9s and this 5 9s or whatever, right? But from the perspective of how wide this is, it ignores these 3, right? And I don't know if that's actually a good behavior, but it is what it is at the moment. Nobody's complained yet. I'm probably the only one using this setting because most people don't know it exists. So Mark, yeah, I don't watch Mark's videos every day. I'm already struggling to watch one of their videos at a time. Alt text on the options as you already talked about, I think, yeah. Of course, that won't really work for mobile users. So ideally, it's a little bit fancier than that. Show seen cells. So the concept of seen cells is basically, I think Ranks likes to call it weak links. It's basically, what other cells does a particular cell see. So for example, this 3 sees, under normal Sudoku rules, the rows, the columns, and the cells in the box. If they were anti-night, it would also see these cells. If it was on a diagonal or inside a killer cage, it might also see this cell, etc., etc. So seen cells basically marks these with a yellow thingamajig here. One issue I have is that, again, my system doesn't really differentiate different kinds of rules. So it just has an algorithm that calculates seen cells. So in this case, for example, includes the diagonals. It might include cells in a cage, right? It does exclude cells hidden by fog. But as you can imagine, between killer cages, so for example, it should see this cell through the killer cages. But I think in this puzzle... Yeah, in this puzzle, for example, it doesn't correctly recognize what is a killer cage because of the way they're defined here on this older puzzle. So I don't know. It should mark this cell as seen from the killer cage connection. And that's actually, I personally really like it for, there are some kind of larger puzzles with long killer cages. In fact, I'm going to quickly look through the daily puzzles to find an example of kind of longer killer cages that will show this off better. And I have to go back quite a bit, apparently. Not like pure killer cage puzzles haven't been really popular. I just saw a screenshot of a puzzle with the Sven peeping out over the top, so that was kind of funny. And it doesn't, for example, it doesn't consider things on lines and thermals as quote-unquote seen because it doesn't really treat lines as a known rule at the moment. These are all very small killer cages. Excuse me, that's taking me a while to find. I'm finding like a lot of puzzles with like 2-cell killer cages and stuff like that, which don't really show this off very well. I think this will do. Maybe not the best example. Yeah, so let's enable seen cells. That's on the gameplay. So if I click this, yeah, you see it'll see the cell, even though it wouldn't see it under standard Sudoku rules, just because of the way seen cells is implemented internally. So that's what seen cells does. I don't know if it's like, I struggled a lot with the visual noise it produces because it adds a lot of elements to the screen. And at the same time, it's got to be visible, but not too visible. It shouldn't interfere too much with other elements. And you have a lot of issues with overlapping transparencies and things like that. I indented the yellow squares so it doesn't, so you can kind of differentiate what's part of a background color versus what's part of the seen cells algorithm. It's not the best feature. Like, I'm not super happy with it yet. And I personally find it a bit distracting. I'd rather switch it off. Mostly I have it on for testing as well. But for certain puzzles, for example, disjoint sets, I've added disjoint set support recently. So for disjoint sets, let's see if we had, I think we had a disjoint set puzzle recently. So if we go to something like this, I think, yeah, so it'll highlight all the disjoint sets. And I think for some people that might make disjoint sets much more fun to solve, where otherwise they wouldn't like to play them at all. All right, that is show scene cells, and we're done with gameplay. So those were the sort of big main settings that most people would ever deal with. Excuse me. Now, import export is a group I've added more recently. Initially, it had, I think I added it for the color palette, right? So it has a way of basically saving the color palette. It currently copies it to the clipboard, but I think, and import new palette via pasting, I think I might have to redo this now because I've added some other items that actually save and load files, and that also works on mobile. While with clipboard, I mean, you can make it work on mobile, but it's a bit of a pain in the ass. So I might actually redo this and then have a more sort of generic that all file save load features kind of work the same way. So I'm gonna make a note of that actually. Redo color palette save / load with file features of other settings. And in fact, I've just added a setting recently where I kind of cheapened out and made it a simpler version and not supporting drag and drop. We'll get to that in a moment. So this is basically the current color palette configuration. The goal for me was I was hoping that people would design like good color blindness friendly color palettes for me, because I don't know much about that, and kind of the unique requirement of having colors that don't interfere with each other and that are easy to distinguish. And there's a lot of, you want triples of colors for, high, medium, low. You want pairs for odd, even. It's not a simple problem, and it's, I think, very much sort of personal taste. And I had a couple of submissions and I haven't processed those. And the goal is that I'll actually create a sort of little website where people can upload their palettes and then vote on them. And then people can find good quality palettes. And maybe in the future, I improve the included default palettes that I just threw together quickly. It's all kind of sort of like, hey, quickly put this together in a rough state and then rush on to the next thing. And yeah, that's kind of the story of a lot of these. Replay GIF. This was mostly something that was bouncing around my head, and I just had to write it out to make it real, so I don't have to think about it anymore. But it basically lets you generate a replay animation of a puzzle you've just solved as a GIF. Since I don't have a replay here, I'm going to load in a replay, and we're going to use it with the next button. So we have replay, save, load. So this will save the current puzzle as well as all your replay actions into a file, and then you can load in that file. So we're going to bring in a file that I've, so for example, I can just drag a file on here, and this is what I mentioned. I can also just say load file. I added this kind of for mobile support. On desktop, drag and drop is fine. On mobile, I don't even know how you would go about that. So I can load in a replay like this. And now I can generate a GIF. I can say, okay, make me 100 frames, make it, the size is fine, and just generate the animation. It'll go through the replay, grab the frames. Takes a little while, for longer puzzles. I tried to optimize it a little bit. It's a little tricky. I'd have to kind of fundamentally change how certain things work. It just takes a few seconds, not too bad. And then you've got the animation. You can download it like this, and there it is. And these files aren't even too big. So this file, for example, is 195 kilobytes. I'm quite happy how it turns out. You can also open it in the browser, and this might be handy for posting to a solver guide, or just for the funsies, I don't know, posting it as a spoiler to the forum, spoiler marked. I don't know, I thought maybe some people might be able to use it in videos, but then all the YouTubers are saying, oh, I already have a recording, but the effort required to actually cut it out of the video and then turn it into something shareable, I don't know. I'm also thinking this might be useful for explaining things like showing off the Festomophil ring, or set theory, you know, as a part of a documentation with little animation, or maybe in a slideshow. I don't know. I'm hoping to be able to use it for the educational version of the app that I'm working on over the next year. So that's the replay GIF, replay save load. We've just seen that. Same thing. I also, when you're solving the puzzle, so let's say, whoops, let's remove a digit and put it back in. It's right there. I'm surprised Simon hasn't mentioned it. I would like to encourage people to actually send me replays. I'm hoping it'll also make things like debugging easier. And I would like to ask Simon in the future, I'd like him to send me some replays. You know, I'd like to do some analysis of how long people take and things like that. Hey, Gabriel, how are you doing? And in the future, I'd like to, maybe for a short period of time, I might like to just suck up the replays and just store them on the server, just to get a bit of an idea of how people play the puzzle, how long they take, and so on. It's basically just the undo history and the puzzle itself. And I'm only including the puzzle itself because otherwise it's it would be a pain in the butt to get the replay to work, because you'd have to find the puzzle first, right? So it saves this file. And let's say, let's have a quick look at this file. It's just yeah, is it? Yeah, it's this one, right? You know, the bottom one. Oh, it's not, yeah, sorry. So this is basically just the replay data, how it's stored in your web page anyways. Excuse me. My nose is super itchy suddenly. And this, I believe, is just the puzzle data. Yeah, this is the puzzle data. Now, these puzzle URLs are very short. If they're longer, obviously that goes into the replay as well, making them a little bit bigger. I personally currently store every replay, and I'd like to use them a little bit for analysis, figuring out certain things. In the future, I always imagined I could figure out which parts in a puzzle are tricky, and maybe add like an automated system for figuring out how tough a puzzle is just from how people are playing. And maybe even like, hey, you seem to struggle with these things. Here are puzzles you might enjoy, or you know, your puzzle difficulty adjustment is this, etc., etc. I mean, it's just technology, and it's currently not really being used like that. But I'm hoping people might find some use for that. And I very recently also added export and import settings. So this is, I figured, hey, this is something for myself. It might help me with debugging. It might let people send me their settings. This just literally is just how the state of these settings. So, you know, export, you get a little JSON file, and it's just what the settings are that are stored in your app. And like I said, I'd like to homogenize any save load thing. So this save load, this dialog, the settings should probably be the same thing. I just didn't want to spend a lot of time building that dialog. But now that I have like 3 uses for it, I'd like to revisit that, clean it all up, and kind of have a singular place for kind of doing all of that. Yeah, except I obviously I would need a place for them to submit it to, you know. But maybe I can automate that. Maybe I can use some sort of Google form where the file gets, I don't know. It probably all depends on me finishing my server move so I can do this more effectively. Excuse me. Yeah. And the problem with voluntary replay submissions is also, I don't know. I'd like for people to kind of opt in into kind of automatically submitting their replays. Maybe I can do a bit of a, hey, I would like to always submit my replays to help in testing or whatever. And then, you know, instead of a user account, let them have a local marker. They can put in their name, their email address, or some anonymous thing. But then we're already starting to get into GDPR and all this stuff. You know, the replay itself doesn't contain any personal identifiable information. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll do something like that where people can sign up basically, and it'll just put a cookie on their computer and then just submit their replays. And in the future, you know, when I have accounts, all the replays will already be there, that kind of thing. All right, advanced. So advanced are things that are good for general use, but maybe not perfect. So kind of you need to know what's happening when you use them. So I added the killer calculator there. I would like to move the killer calculator to mainstream use, but it has some severe limitations, and I'm not super happy with all of it. But personally, I use it all the time. So the killer calculator is this. We need a puzzle with killer cages. Yeah, so the killer calculator will give me all the different ways of doing 20 in 4 digits, all the different ways of doing 26. And for just sort of basic stuff, it works, but it breaks down when it comes to unmarked cages or custom rule cages. It tries to kind of it does certain things, like if I'm putting in digits, it says, oh, okay, it'll exclude them, include them. You can exclude, include them manually. You know, I've tried to do a couple of things, and for most basic killer cage puzzles, it works. But for anything sort of a little bit more advanced, or let's just say, you know, advanced users immediately said, oh, it doesn't do this, and it doesn't get this right, you know. And I have a calculated cell sums where it basically says on unmarked cages, it tries to do certain things, but it's really a partial solve, and the solver is super primitive. So all I'm getting right now, most of the time, is just like, it's running the solver and it basically times out because I don't want to slow down people's phones and whatnot. Definitely needs a revisit. That's why it's still under advanced. Selection style. Selection style is another one of those settings that I might remove because I don't know how many of you remember, but selections used to be look like this, and not like this, yellow. And let's get rid of the show and see cells because that probably interferes with it. But that's what selections used to look like, and that's basically just from Sam's original application. Then somebody suggested the blue outline frames, and I was kind of experimenting with something because these would interfere with background colors, something furious. Like, it's very hard to see what's going on. And I like the blue cages better, but as always, I don't want to force things on people, so I left that setting in there, and I don't know if there's people out there using it. So probably I want in the future to add some sort of something to Google Analytics that says, hey, how many people are using this setting? You know, so I can kind of see if nobody's using it, I might just get rid of it. And I think I came up with some other ones, so I kind of added an outline. It's bad though because it's a per cell outline, and I think it was designed to kind of interact differently with different color schemes, and I was just messing around with it at the time. This was a long time ago. This was before I had sort of more advanced algorithms to deal with this. So I don't like them. I don't think anybody's using them. It's one of those settings that probably should go away. That's why it's under advanced. I'd already solved on. So I think we have the... Yeah. So right now you see, even if the puzzle is solved, and we can actually reload the stored replay here, which is so great. Like, just even for this kind of testing, having this feature for myself is great. So if I now refresh it, right? And I have the dialog, don't pause on start off. It's supposed to show a dialog. Why is it not showing the dialog? Is there an error? There's no error. Advanced. Right, already solved on. Okay, so when that setting is off, it just loads the puzzle. Interesting enough, I didn't realize that dialog was actually tied into it. I thought it was just the blurring of it. Yeah, so you see, interesting. It comes up when it's not solved. If it's solved, just shows it. But the puzzle is in plain sight. And this basically blurs the puzzle. And the idea is basically that if people load an older puzzle they haven't finished, they might want to blur it. Maybe they want to restart the puzzle. Maybe so it wasn't blurred there because you've just solved it. But if you start like this, I can say, oh, I want to view it, or I want to restart it because maybe haven't played in a while and I just want to, you know, start over. And I personally actually kind of like this. And this was something brought over from the mobile app where I was using this even in the thumbnails, because I didn't want to spoil puzzles in the thumbnails, right? So that's what the hide already solved on and off setting does. New solution link. So these are some of the sort of semi-editing features I added. So basically, and that doesn't work on this kind of link. So I need to, yeah, this kind of link doesn't support solutions, right? But it'll work on something like this, right? So not like this. I need to sort that out. But basically the idea is, let's go to a link that'll actually work on something like this. So if I put digits in like this, I can say new solution link. It'll basically create a new puzzle data with this added as the solution. It doesn't actually let you type in the solution. You have to put them onto the board. The other place where that shows up is if I do a check here, Yeah, so on these kinds of links, that doesn't work. Let's see if we have a puzzle where this will work, because these are basically the SCF format, which doesn't support solutions. But if I load a Clover puzzle here from a couple of days ago, right? This was, I think, yesterday's daily puzzle. So if I put in the final digit here, this puzzle is correct. So this puzzle already has a solution. Yeah. So if this puzzle didn't have a solution, it would basically put a little item in here, create new solution link, right? But because it has already a solution, it doesn't do that. But you still can go in here and add a new solution link. And I think some setters asked for this because, sometimes it didn't pop up if they already have a solution, or the solution was kind of broken, or their solution included blanks. In which case the final dialog wouldn't show up because the puzzle wasn't solved. They could still use this. So I could eradicate the top digits, press this button, create a new puzzle with a solution that had blanks for the first line. That's what this button does. I have a couple of these partial editing things, and I would like to in the future group them all together, maybe a new group for editing, right? The reason why the order is kind of chaotic is because these settings are added with files, with external files that kind of work like plugins, and they don't really know when the others happen, right? So there's no overlying order onto these, and that's one of the reasons why I had the groups as well, because at least with the groups there's sort of some organization to them. Excuse me. All right, I really should have scheduled a break. My throat is hurting, but we're getting there. So we covered the letter tool hotkey earlier, so this just kind of has different versions of how the letter tool can be activated, mostly because I didn't want to make a decision and people couldn't agree. So it just has sort of all the potential options in there with all their trade-offs. Add background image, similar to the solution link. You add an image. I have recently added support for opacity and some other setting. And I might actually add some support for like positioning as well. So this dialog will then get updated. And it basically does the same thing. It just injects some data, generates a new piece of thing here. I don't know if it creates a new fpuzzles link. And this is something also I want to like organize a bit more. So for example, it might, for puzzles like the SCF puzzle data, it might just convert them to a CTC link with the unpacked data in it, and then still allow adding solutions and allowing all this editing. So it might just be like, hey, it'll change that data, but it'll homogenize it to this kind of format. And the To My Valentine is similar. This was the Valentine special. So we would be able to add a piece of text to the rules, and then you could press that button, and then you could add a name, and it would generate a new puzzle link where the My Valentine text in the rules would be substituted. And my plan is to change this to a just arbitrary rules editing tool. So same thing, but you just get to edit the rules, and that's it. I haven't thought through if this is going to cause some sort of issue, like security issue, that somebody could fake a puzzle with a different rule set, but they could just create that puzzle in fpuzzles anyways. So I'm going to put that on the to-do list. Change My Valentine feature to arbitrary rules editing. And yeah, this is the to-do list that I'm putting together. It's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. All right. Here we go. So that's the My Valentine. Again, it's one of those, it's a little one-off feature. I think the main way this was working was that you could add a link, an argument to the command line, to the URL, and it would just pop up this dialog when you open the puzzle. And I think that's how it was used in the CTC video. In fact, let's just go back to that 1 month ago. This would have been in February. So 2 months ago, Valentine. Let's look for the heart. And I think, yeah. So Simon, this was kind of a custom request by Simon. And I think it had the puzzle link, and then it has, yeah. And I think if I look at this, yeah, it has a redirect. No, the redirect token is like a YouTube thing. But it basically has no more cache. Yeah, no more cache. I don't know who added that, but we have the Valentine link here, and it pops up this dialog. And the rules text basically has My Valentine in it. I can put a name in it, and it'll praise that, and it'll create a new link when I press that button. And this actually goes through my API, which I set up at the time through tinypuzz.com. And this is another one of those long-term projects. Tinypuzz.com, I would like to establish as a generic tinyURL system for puzzles specifically, but running on my servers. Because tinyURL, for some reason, has a lot of issues where very often people can't access it. It goes through cloud, whatever. And we don't need the performance of, of tinyURL. We're like, my site has 20,000 users a day. I could easily handle a service like that for 30, 40,000 hits a day, no problem, right? And it could enable people to be sort of confident that this isn't fake. It doesn't send them to some porn site. I could say, hey, this only works for these registered domains that are known puzzle services. fpuzzles, Sudoku Labs, whatever else, and I can add to that list in the future. If there's ever somebody who's building a new tool that isn't covered yet, I just add it in and people can use it, and it'll be a service to the community type situation, And of course, service to myself, because I'll make a lot of use of that. And it'll enable us to kind of edit puzzles by having a simple URL, Anyway, that's kind of future plans, but that's the editing features there. Then I added a little section. I got some criticism, like I have a couple of little things. I don't know if I finish the puzzle, right? It's got my little icon there. It's got Toby, my border collie, that is also part of this icon. This is a graphic that was designed by the art director from the game studio I used to work at when I left that game studio at the end of or at the beginning of COVID, really, before I started doing this full time. They created this beautiful graphic that I'm using all over the place because I really enjoy it. It's even on my t-shirt. And I hope in the future to maybe do more, commission like a character, like maybe commission Toby the dog as a character for the educational version of the app. That would be nice. I have support links, my YouTube channel, link to my Patreon, and I think, support me on Patreon is on the site as well over here. It's even over here. It's kind of in a couple of places. There's plain SudokuPad, obviously designed to encourage people to get my app if they don't have it, which also supports me. And like I said at the beginning of the stream, all of that is not enough to actually fully support me. I'm still borrowing money. I'm still going in debt every month. But it's at least made it potentially possible. And that's why I'm still going after all this time. And, a lot of it is my own fault. SudokuPad, the mobile app, was really only ever supposed to be the first step. And then I was supposed to build other apps. And I'm still working on this one app and still improving it. So it's kind of, I'm not very business minded. So that's kind of problematic. But that little rant aside, these settings let people hide these. So you probably know there's a little guy popping up at the beginning. That was just a little fun thing here. And this basically just disables that. So no more guy here, right? If you don't like that, if you're doing a YouTube stream, you don't want things popping up. Hiding support links. If you put that on and you solve the puzzle, no more links at the end of this dialogue. So, if you don't want to support me, you don't have to, because I think somebody posted like a browser extensions that hide them because he didn't like it. Okay, I think that's what prompted me to actually put these in. We can hide the button at the top as well. If you don't have the app and you're not planning to buy it, that button doesn't do anything for you. And this one actually hides the emojis on the final dialogue as well and replaces them with the old version. So, and to be cheeky, I put my support button here. Hey, if you're gonna remove all these things, at least, consider all of this, right? And I don't remember exactly how the defaults work, because this is the only one that's inverted relative to the other ones, where the on version is how it should be. So I don't actually fully understand how the defaults interact here. But yeah, so the support section is basically everything related to my own sort of personal branding and here. And speaking of branding, I should probably bring it up. There is some CTC branding on the site, but CTC are in no way affiliated with this. Like, they're not, the only support they're doing is basically mentioning me on their channel, and that's not really out of the goodness of their heart. that is in exchange for a large fraction of the income from the sales of the app. The only other thing we're basically interacting with is that they have app.krakenthecryptic.com, which is a domain name they own pointing at my server, but my domain is sudokupad.app, and that I could encourage everyone to use. And I'm still using their icon because when I started, like, that was kind of the association, but I really want to change that actually. I kind of debrand the site from their influence because, you know, they're not really, people think that, you know, Simon likes to call me his developer or their developer, but I'm not. They're not paying me. They've never paid me. In fact, I'm paying them a lot of money. So it's a very different situation, but at the same time, you know, public, like you know, this app wouldn't be anything without the traffic that they're sending from their videos. So it's I would have never attempted to build something like that if I didn't have this sort of built-in sales channel through their support. You know, if I had enough Patreon support to not need that, I would happily, you know, make this the mobile app free, build a open free version of a kind of cloud service web version that interacts, you know, that you can play on the mobile app, that you can save your progress into a kind of your online profile, that you can also continue playing the same puzzle on the web version, all this stuff. I'd love to do that, but I need to, you know, keep the lights on, pay the rent, pay for food and all this sort of stuff. All right, that's supporting of SudokuPad here. And finally, we have an experimental session where I basically throw everything that isn't really quite ready for prime time, which isn't good enough, or it's sort of, you know, excuse me, maybe brand new, and I want to bake it in a little bit first before I move it to other sections. So we have the replay tool, which is actually quite old. And that was my version of sort of, hey, let's go to the beginning, let's play back, you know, pause, step forward. But like I said, it's not really good enough yet to be a primary tool. But now I've done a lot more work with the replay, the saving of the replay, and so on and so forth. I had an experimental scrobble bar feature. You know, scrobble bar is like the seeking bar in a video, where you could literally seek through the replay. I'd love to implement something like that. So I might revisit this now that I have a bit of a better hold on the replay. I have done some performance optimizations. And kind of make this a prime tool, because I think it would be, I think there's some other features that are that were suggested that are involved with this, which is sort of like, what do you call that? Sort of save points, right? Where people might want to bifurcate, or they want to explain something in a video, but then they want to jump back to solving the puzzle again, or, you know, without kind of losing their progress. Because the way undo redo works is if you undo backwards and then put in something new, you lost your forward redo history. You cannot undo what you've done now and then redo and go back into your previous branch, right? So adding things like that to this tool might make it more powerful, make it more useful. So that's why it's an under experimental. It's also quite old, so it's not like guaranteed to, I'm surprised it still works, to be honest, which is in a way a testament to how well the sort of underlying systems are actually designed to kind of have this long-term forward compatibility. And we'll talk about that a little bit after we're done with the features. The dark mode, very early feature, must-have thing, but I've never been happy with the implementation. It's never been really good enough. I know some people are using it all the time. Excuse me. And I know that, for example, for me on my phone, I had some burn-in issues. I have some emails sitting in my inbox that I'm scared to read about people having burn-in because of the very bright user interface elements and so on. So dark mode, I definitely need to improve the support. And I've done some work in refactoring how colors are handled internally. It is a little tricky because it does all sorts of weird stuff to kind of pick out various design elements off the board and kind of try to figure out which colors need swapping, which don't, and how to address them in the CSS, kind of generically work. Like, for example, this icon obviously doesn't work very well, you know, and that's why it's under experimental. Similar to the letter tool and the hotkey stuff, I would like to actually have a color editor and sort of outsource the difficulty, so at least people see why it's difficult, because, you know, you can, do you want to just invert all blacks to whites? Probably not, right? For example, crop key dots, that's something I had to very custom handle because people complained that they were inverted, even though it makes perfect sense from a hey, the system doesn't know what a copy dot really is, right? So the dark mode has always kind of been pending me building a color customization system for the whole user interface to basically get eventually graduated to being a full-blown, high-level, proper, you know, stamp of quality on it feature. Marbles, the start marble run. So there was a marble run puzzle. This was like this one puzzle, and I think it came out around the Fog of Wars thing. And it just inspired me. So somebody... Marble Run, let's see, cracking the cryptic. And it was a puzzle where you had to design a path for a marble to run along. And then somebody, and you basically drew some lines. This is an old puzzle, so I'm going to spoil it. And you basically ended up with a path through it, with the idea of saying this puzzle needs to end up here, and it needs to roll along this path and fall on things. And somebody basically created a little like extension or a little plugin or something that basically just made the whole thing movable. Like you could literally control with the mouse the whole thing, and even have a little ball rolling along, and and I basically replicated that. So what I did was, and I'm gonna reset here, and I don't fully remember exactly how it worked, but I think, and I don't even know if it works with the colors, but I think this would be a source of a marble, and then the marble would roll along, and black is the worst color here. So let's just go with green, which is like the default color. So we're gonna put a green here, we put this here and this, and it would basically create a ball that could kind of roll along these. And when I press that button, it basically just kicks in this whole script, and the ball falls down, and I can tilt it, and I think it is depending on, and the problem, like, it's not a fully implemented thing. It doesn't undo it. I even added some sound effects just to mess around. I think it actually depends on lines drawn on the cells rather than between the cells. So if I do this and say marble run, now it basically creates these barriers, and it actually loads in an external collision detection library and kind of makes it all work. I probably should remove it. It's not functional. It was a fun little goof. It inspired me to write some code, and that's why it's under experimental. But in reality, it shouldn't be in here, or at least it should be built in a way that it's actually usable. But it's kind of just sitting in there as a reminder for me to, hey, one day take a look at this and sort it out. Compact pencil marks. That's something I've added recently. I think it was somebody suggested it. And the idea was basically if you have like a largely marked cell, maybe we can indicate a range here. And that's basically the implementation of that. And it's actually fairly functional, and I've used it for a while. So I think I can even do 1-7, and it will actually do this. But let's say if I remove the 4 out of the middle, it will actually unroll the ranges. And initially it was, I think, a minimum range of 4 characters, but now it's 5. But with 4 characters, you could actually have 2 ranges. You could have 1-5-9, and that would actually work. The reason why this is not a sort of primary thing is because the conflict checking doesn't work properly with this. So let's see, check pencil marks on, conflict checker full, 6 and 7 are red. We do this, 5 is missing in the middle. Boom. We don't have highlighting here, not even if the digit is showing. And I think before I can make this work, it should be this. And for example, let's say if the error is on the 3, the range should stop at edges between error marked digits, right? Because the problem now is that I don't see the conflict on the 3 very easily. And it actually makes it harder to solve certain puzzles. It makes it a little annoying. And that's the only reason why it's in experimental right now. Other than that, I think it's definitely a valid way of working. It's probably not going to be for everybody. It might take some getting used to, but if it interacts correctly with the error marks, so let's say putting in a 4 would change this. It might even highlight where something is happening. Instead of just changing the color, it would actually change the shape of it. It might actually make it easier to see. So I put in quite a bit of effort to get it to the point where it is, but it's not completely there yet. Let's skip puzzle events quickly because that's the most recent feature and we've talked about it a bit earlier. The UI theme is basically a backporting of something that was unique to the mobile app, but it's basically easier for me if it's in the core engine. So every time I update the mobile app, I have to do less kind of modifications and have fewer things to worry about kind of make work. So I kind of want to bring in all the features from the mobile app in here, even if not necessarily they are being used, right? Like the menu of puzzles and so on and so forth. And this is a very kind of, it was kind of a very quick thing I put together. It's just changing sort of a primary color thing. And I don't think it interacts well with dark mode at all, but it basically just toggles the primary colors. So it's not really like something to write home about, but together with a future color, a full color editor, this might be, you know, kind of putting together color themes, sharing them, similar to the color palettes, right? It might go hand in hand. It might be a future feature that makes sense in that context. Cell copy and paste is a fairly recent feature. It's inexperimental because it's not like, there are different ways of doing it, and it's not super obvious how it works. But the idea has always, this was something I wanted to do kind of from the start. So let's see, if I have something like this, I can now press Control C and Control V. And you see it doesn't copy everything. It copies sort of from the top down, the same order as I would delete if I press delete. So if I copy this, it pastes this, right? And that's kind of why it's under experimental, because it's not clear how this should work. Should it just copy the whole cell? It seems like the obvious thing to do, but it's also not necessarily the useful thing in a solving context. And I think Mark created a quick extension that does like real clipboard copy and paste. That like it takes the selected cells, converts them into a format, some sort of HTML sort of format, that then goes onto the clipboard, and then it also reads that format. But in theory, you could make it work with different across apps, right? You could copy it from here, paste it into FPuzzle and so on. And I think it copies the whole selected region exactly as it is. But from a solver perspective, that's very rarely what you want. You have very rarely, sometimes you do, very, very rarely. And that's why in the moment it's like this. And it might, like, I think it could work for coloring puzzles. So for example, you'd say, or letter puzzles. So you'd say, okay, all A's should become 1, 2, 3, you know, that kind of thing. So you could double click the digit or the color and then paste your sort of selection there. But it's not super clean. Like the use case isn't super clear yet. So that's why it's under experimental. Because if I don't put it under experimental, people will think, hey, why doesn't it work this way? Or why doesn't it work that way? And I don't have a good answer for that, right? And maybe there's not a good way of doing it. Maybe it's not obvious how you would want to copy and paste in a puzzle, right? And then finally, the puzzle events. And the 3 ITC stands for 3 in the corner. And that's basically this, not this. It is this little visual effect. And we spoke about this briefly at the beginning. The goal is to have a generic event system where you can have things, you know, you have some code that basically watches the board as you're playing, and it basically waits for a particular configuration, for a particular thing to happen, you know, maybe pencil marking, maybe reaching a certain solving step, maybe a percentage of puzzles solved, maybe your first use of a certain thing, maybe fully coloring odds and evens, you know, it could be all sorts of things. And then you can trigger something. And the trigger right now, it's this little confetti effect, but it could also be a little pop-up or a little message or saving a setting or, you know, transitioning to another puzzle, maybe, you know, maybe you can implement puzzle packs that way. It's kind of open-ended, but in the moment, obviously there isn't an easy way of adding these and managing them, right? So in the moment, it's just, I'll disable it, you know, a streamer might like it. People think it's a CTC thing and they might not appreciate it in other contexts, etc. But in the future, this will be a more extensive configuration where you can literally wire up triggers and effects and load in more ones. And maybe you know, have this be a community thing. People can create their own triggers and effects and so on and so forth. It's sort of a forward-looking high or lower level feature, I should say. And And for now, it created a bit of buzz and people are enjoying it. And, I can use the same mechanism in the future for other things without having to build something from scratch, And maybe it's the sort of thing where becomes an underlying foundational system where then re-implement some of these things within that system and make them simpler, For example, this might be useful for conflict checking, right? I mean, right now, the conflict checker listens to action events and waits for certain actions, But maybe there'll be in the future a specific event for digit entered with conflict, and then the conflict, and then an effect, highlight the digit as red, that kind of thing. So it could fundamentally power the whole thing, right? Of course, it might not make sense, but it's there for that kind of purpose. And that's experimental. And to be honest, experimental could have a whole bunch of more things in it. There's stuff, for example, we haven't even got to that. There's the partial editor features that I've started working on. And we're gonna actually look at that very soon as well. And that could be here as an experimental thing. Right now it's as a separate branch because I think it needs too many changes to the underlying engine code. But I'd love to implement that as a separate feature that's sort of sitting there as an experimental preview of what's to come, even though it doesn't currently, it's no way it's functional, And it's definitely leaving space for that. By the way, feel free to post any kind of questions or comments you have, and I'll be happy to answer them. And we'll probably, I'm feeling my voice go, so this isn't gonna go on much longer. We've covered all the features. I'm glad I muscled through that. And I'm not sure if any of this will be usable as a specific video, but maybe I can use it as an inspiration of re-recording a particular aspect and explaining maybe a set of features together. I think a lot of the visual and gameplay stuff might be useful to know. And then maybe some of the more obscure things of why they are working the way they do. And then maybe there might be some videos worth doing just for setters, about these partial editing tools. Maybe one about all the support stuff, Now, earlier I mentioned something else I wanted to get to in the future, and I think it was future plans, maybe about the link shortening service, but I think we covered that. I mean, that's kind of obvious of how that's going to work. Oh, that is a good question. That is a good question. It's like one of those things where I feel I've left it out for so long. I don't even know how to justify doing it. But maybe it'll be just one of these days. It'll just be a thing, And maybe the right time to do it is maybe after sort of like a major cleanup pass where I'm removing all this crafty stuff, where I'm tackling a lot of pending issues, Yeah, this is a full-time gig. Maybe my productivity isn't as high as some people might expect. I do struggle with ADHD and with kind of standing in my own way, but I'm also like, it seems like the perfect thing to do part-time, but I've never been able to do that. I've never been able to do two things side by side. For example, earlier last year, I took on a contracting job for 3 months, I think, helping a studio optimize their mobile title. And I basically didn't touch SudokuPad in that time. I just couldn't, even though that contracting job was part-time. It was only 20 hours a week. To be fair, I probably put in 40 hours a week anyways, because that's just how I roll. But I really didn't touch SudokuPad in that time. And, it'd be nice if I could, but I just can't. Thankfully, my normal work, or that work particular, can earn quite a bit of money. So that kind of financed me for more than that 3 months time. But that's the thing. I'm kind of putting money into SudokuPad. I'm borrowing money. I'm doing extra work to pay for it. It's not self-sustaining just yet, but it's not too far off. Obviously, it's very far off from earning what I would earn working at a studio. But creative freedom, enjoying what you're doing. There's things that are worth it beyond that. Thanks, Thomas Miles. Really appreciate that. That is something I need to get better at as well, because I feel like sometimes I'm a bit isolated and it sucks the motivation out of me. And there'll be people cheering me on in like a chat room somewhere where I don't know about, and all I'm seeing is the emails piling up of things broken, or when do you update the mobile app, or whatever, So it's kind of tricky sometimes. Yeah, for example, EVVVV is asking in the Discord chat, will the Steam version get an update at some point? The last one was in 2021, but the app is still being sold and advertised on CDC videos. It's missing a lot of features, and we've stopped using it because of that. And I totally get that, and they're absolutely right. And I've been working on this since December last year. Now I should have been working. I spent several months working on it early in 2021, late in 2021, early 2022, to work on a fundamental feature it needs, which is data backup, because currently the data is stored basically in the local storage of the browser view, and on iOS it gets wiped when you update the app. And I didn't want to push an update because of that. And now it's so long that it's much worse because people have more puzzles in that storage. And I really need to do it. And there's no good excuse for the other platforms, because in Android and Steam, the last updates did not wipe the data, right? I have the version ready. It's not 100% ready. So for example, if I run it, there's still some errors and there's some stuff not working 100%, and I need to clean up. I just need to get it done. And unfortunately, I'm not motivated by people yelling at me to do it, right? Especially for something they have paid, that I got maybe 50 cents for a year and a half ago. And I have to think about how many hours of work do I owe a person that's given me 50 cents a year and a half ago for something that they received at the time. They didn't pay me 50 cents, and they didn't pay 50 cents, but 50 cents is what I ended up receiving because of what the app stores take, what I sent to Cracking the Cryptic for the advertising on their videos. But in the end, the app is paying less than what it costs me to do the work. So it's a weird situation where the users, of course, want an app that's fully functional. It doesn't make sense for them to have the paid version be less functional than the free version, right? But for me, it's also hard to justify it because I know that I can do all this work, and all I'm doing is putting more work into something that's not paying me for that work, right? And every idea, Simon asked me a couple of weeks ago about doing an app for selling kind of more obscure puzzle types that their Studio Goya app doesn't support. But the truth is, and they wanted more money, a bigger share of the thing, and they wanted their expenses covered before splitting and stuff. But my expenses aren't covered, right? So I would be borrowing money from my girlfriend to send to Simon for the privilege of letting him make a profit on selling an app for potentially relatively few users. Like the more obscure the puzzles, the smaller the number of people who are interested get. It's a hard thing to justify. So I'm kind of struggling to make it all work because I'd like to do it. I'd like to get as much stuff. I enjoy building the features. That's why I'm doing it. But, it's an expensive hobby for me right now, basically. So, part of also why I want to do these live streams, kind of to let people know, hey, I'm working on this, and I don't just work on it for like 2 hours every Sunday. I work on this every day. And there's just a lot of things in the air, and things are always a little bit more complicated. You'd think, it's just a little grid with a couple of numbers in it, but for some reason, it's actually fairly complicated. So yeah, let us move on to. Oh yes, let's have a quick look. So I have this version of the repo. Let us see. I should have tested this. I didn't have time. Let us see if. I should be able to view branches here, and I should have a branch for the editor. Let's go there and see if that can work still. So I think it should be running here, and I should have. This should now be on the editor branch. And it's running. It's version 0.1220. Holy moly, that's over 200 versions ago. But there should be... Oh my god, this is old. We should refresh. No, this is not the new version. I think this is cached files, right? So this might mean that this version doesn't work. 0.122. How do I check this out? Don't know. Do I have to do this? I thought if I click on the branch here, it would do that. Huh. All right. I think now it's changed. Let's see what version we're getting now. 163. That looks better. But we do not have editing here. And I don't remember if this is a set enable editing tool. There we go. All right. Let's do it on a slightly more interesting puzzle. So this is running on a different port because it's a different repo. And I'm kind of happy that these old ones still work. So we have an editing tool, and this was my start at the at creating editing support, which is something I definitely want to do, but I want to do it right, and I want to do it the SudokuPad way. So it needs to be easy to use and functional and so on and so forth, beginner friendly, you know. And it's a little rough, the user interface, and I try to fit it in here, which is probably not the best idea, but the idea is that it works just like the solving. So now I can just select things, right? I can just click on it and I can just move it. I don't have to have very custom tools for everything. You know, these are just visual elements, right? And I can, you know, I can just do this, right? Now I've changed the cage and I want to move this here, right? These are color squares. So this is, for example, maybe not the best way of doing it, but that's just how it is in the original puzzle, right? Here's an arrow, right? Now I'm just, yeah. So for example, for things like that, I think, yeah, I just haven't implemented it yet, you know. But the idea is that you can do arbitrary lines. It obviously needs to be improved how you can select things and so on. And then, you know, I can change the thickness here of this line. And I think I can just Alt, Control, long press to add a point. And again, like I wanted to do something that is mobile friendly. I think a long press to delete, yes. I guess I can't add points to the outside here yet. And this is obviously not the ideal way of doing it. Oop. If I delete too many points, I won't have space to add more points in. But to be able to do something that works on mobile, that's easy to use, I don't know how because I know I can control click, right? And I can shift click. Right click. Okay. And maybe long press. No. If I select it and I press a free square, it adds that to the cage. Again, this is sort of an early draft. And now I think I can't select it anymore because I think there's a bug. Yeah, there's a bug. But the idea is to kind of have it work on mobile. The ultimate goal is to have a detailed sort of inspector here for all of these components. So like thickness for this, line for the, you know, overlay. The overlay. So we can increase the size of this overlay. You know, we can't edit the color yet. We can change where it is, but we can also just grab it. Except right now we can't because there's other things on top of it. And these are kind of the issues that you know, this is a quick prototype. But you can see where I'm trying to get with it. You know, it's not as obscure as F-Puzzles and PenPa with all this weird complexity. That in principle, anybody should be able to go here and start making whatever puzzle they want. But the nice thing, and I don't know if I can pull it off, but the nice thing should also be that you can just open any puzzle and start modifying it, you know? So you have something like, you know, you have something like I think I should be able to do this. No, it doesn't support line breaks yet. That you have something like an existing puzzle and you just open it up and you want to change something. Like, for example, F-Puzzle is pretty anal about where lines can go. Like it can't do, you know, if I have, let's find a puzzle with arrows. Did we open this before? Let's just reset, right? And let's go to 90143. Nope, 4. Yeah. So, for example, if you want to have 2 lines passing through the same area, and I don't think, nope, I don't have editing for arrows yet. Yeah. So if we go to this one, and we bring it into localhost and port 9014. Here we go. not this. Yeah. So, for example, if you have lines that go through a cell like this, in FPuzzles, you struggle to have another set of lines passing through the same cells. But with this editor, you should be able to do something like this, bring this over there, and just kind of align them. And of course, where the discontinuities and continuities are, that's something that might be up to the source program where it came from. But the idea is you could do something like this, right? And that's something that's currently very hard to do in FPuzzles natively, right? And now you have two parallel lines that are passing through the same cells, but there's no question of which goes where and so on and so forth, right? And that's kind of the goal for the editing component. I've spent quite a bit of time on this. But then I panicked about updating the mobile app, and I said, okay, that's not priority. And this was a long time ago, and I'm still haven't released a new version of the mobile app. So it's a little embarrassing, but it's also kind of my struggle, right? I think I'm gonna start winding it down. I think there aren't that many people here right now. Let's see. I haven't heard. The last message was by Thomas. 64 views in total. There's currently 5 viewers on YouTube, so it's 1 viewer on Twitch. I appreciate you guys popping in. Oh yes, I just saw a mention of me on on the FPuzzles channel. Source is oh, okay. Somebody replied. Yeah, because somebody's mentioning about buying FPuzzles. Like, they should maybe wanna support me and let me finish my editor. That would be maybe an effort better spent than trying to, FPuzzles, the foundation is problematic. Most of what FPuzzles is doing today isn't FPuzzles itself, but it's add-ons by ranks and so on. So, I don't know if that's the right approach. All right, I'm gonna start winding down. I really appreciate you guys hanging out and coming by and celebrating this 100th episode of this live stream. It's a little cheaty because I had a 99.1 and a 99.2 and a 99.3. But I guess that's just comes with the territory, the way I do version numbers. So let us solve today's daily puzzle. And I'm going to solve this on... So this is, for example, the the cryptic domain, but I like to solve it on my own domain. And I usually solve it on beta for testing, but today, as a special treat, I'm gonna solve it on SudokuPad.app proper. It's not even that old yet, so it should be good. And this one is called Antiquing. It's by Bill Murphy. Bill Murphy, he did a great shout out by calling a puzzle a few days ago. He literally called it patreon.com/svencodes, and I think I gained like 5 patrons off the back of that, and that really cheered me up. So thanks again, Bill Murphy. Really appreciate that. Let's see what you got for us today. Normal Sudoku rules apply. Cells that are chess kings move apart must not contain the same digits. So chess kings move is surrounding cells. So, and we can use our scene cells to see that includes these corner cells. And I see it's fairly filled in. So my first instinct is to fill in these because there's only 3 missing each row column. And then we're probably mostly done already. Let's do it. It probably is not going to be very hard. So like the 8 is already a given here. Yeah, missing 1, 3, and 7. And I think, yeah, each one of those will give us a digit basically. Here we're missing 2, 5, and 7. And again, the 2s are not here, so they got to be here. And here we're missing 2, 3, and 5. And here the 3s are blocked in 2 places. Placing a 3 here. We're missing a 5, 6, and 7. Same thing. Each of these is probably going to give us 1 digit. And I think that... Oh, nope. We have this one. And that's missing a 5, 6, and an 8. And here we are given the 5 outright down there. Because the 8 and the 6 are already taken. All right. So I think these are the most given digits, and they probably affect. So I'm guessing this row is going to be the most limited because it has all these digits next to it. And in fact, thanks to the king's move constraint, I think this is already filled. Like you see, the 6 can only go there. The 1, 2, 3 cannot go there, and it can't go there, and it can't go there. I should have paid attention. 4 is not available yet. 5, 6, 7. We're missing 9. And we're missing 8. And I don't... Yeah, 8 is not here. So we have an 8 here. And this will be a 4 or a 9. And I don't think we know which one yet. And I think each of these rightmost cells, although this was the most limited, these are still have these partial question marks over here in the corners. So let's see, 4s are now here. 9s go here. 3s and 3, except that one is prohibited by the king's constraint. All right, I'm gonna fill in anytime I only have 3 choices left. 2, 5, and 7. Hey, Michael Edwards. Nice about the fill in applicable digits. I believe somebody has made an extension for that already. And you're getting to that realm where you can do all sorts of things. 2, 5, 7 in a triple, so that's a 3. You can do all sorts of things there. And you kind of gotta wonder, you know, where do you draw the line? People will complain that they don't want it, even if you make it adjustable and so on and so forth. I always try very hard to kind of figure out which sorts of things make the most sense for the most people, you know. It's not easy, but I believe sometimes my work isn't just to make the code work, but sometimes my work is to actually also partially decide of what a person should be offered. Not because they shouldn't have the choice, but mostly because the choosing is hard. And sometimes people don't like doing the choosing. I know I don't. So sometimes the choosing is kind of the work. And by not doing the work for the user, you're not really doing them any favors. You know what I mean? So sometimes, you know, choosing for the user is kind of the highest service, really. I think the rest of this will be like fairly straightforward now that we have, like, the king's constraint with so many rows and columns partially filled is gonna be almost completely constraining. All right, 6, 8. We have 3 missing here. That's 1, 2. We're missing 3, 6, and 9. And the 9 is here. The 6 is here, and the 3 is there. That puts a 8 here and a 1 here. Resolves the 1 here. We're missing a 6 and a 9, which are resolved by this 6. Now these are resolved. We need a 1, which can't be... Well, gotta be here. The king's constraint is actually making this fairly easy. And we have a 5 over here as well. 6, 7, and then we're missing 8 and 9, which are given by this 9. And then the final digits are 5 here, 7 here, 8 here, and 9 here. 443, and I believe that probably should earn me a party hat. Thank you very much. So what I do nowadays, I just save this, and they're just piling up in my download folder. Let's see, this one is only 4 kilobytes. Let's see what it looks like. Let's have a quick peek at it. But basically, I'm hoping in the future I can use these for debugging if I need some sample data, you know, solve puzzles. And the nice thing is I can just erase the if I need an empty grid, I can just erase this. But if I need a filled grid, I just drag this over and I have a filled grid again, right? So it's really great for testing. So maybe I've built this feature for myself. Yeah, and it basically just has the puzzle ID, which is basically the big part of the URL in it, and then the rest is just the standard replay data, which is it's compressed with an LZ algorithm, but it's, you know, you can get very easily at the data yourself if you ever want to build like an extension or a piece of code that looks at replays and so on and so forth. All right, I think I'm gonna call it a day. I might not be able to speak for the next 3 days. We'll see. We'll see. Thank you very much for stopping by, celebrating 100 code hangouts. I'll be back to working on some feature or other next week. I really need to get the mobile app finished. But, you know, feedback helps. So I'm going to hear from people, hopefully mentioning of the stream. I'll get some more feedback, more motivation, knowing that people care, knowing that people are actually, you know, I have the analytics. I know people are using it, but it's very abstract. And very few people actually communicate with me. Like, there's not a lot of activity in my Discord chat, on my Twitter, etc. So it's hard to remind myself that actually people care, you know. Like if this site were to disappear tomorrow, I think a lot of people would care. But I can't just do that to remind people, so I don't know how else to do it. I already have myself peeking up at the top of every puzzle, so, you know. There we go. And off the top of the screen as well. Anyway, thank you very much for hanging out. Really appreciate it. 100 streams happened faster than I expected. In fact, I wasn't ready for it by a long shot. Every now and then, by the way, I started doing some, I only did 2 so far, but I do some coding for fun streams. I'm just not to forget my graphic programming background, so I can work on some, you know, animated sprites and some shader writing and so on. I'd like to get back into that and do that maybe every other week or something like that. We'll see. In the meantime, I hope I'll see you again in a stream here or on the Discord chat or on my Twitter. You can find information to all these places at svencodes.com, which is basically just the places where you can find me. Appreciate on Patreon is always support on Patreon is always appreciated. That's kind of the more Patreon income I have, the less I have to worry about silly things. Yeah, and you know, if I had enough income from Patreon to not need anything else, I would just open source everything. You know, I would love working on this as an open source project. You know, build the editor, create an online database, create an online account system, let people bring in puzzles, share, you know, what they feel, what they want, kind of ratings for puzzles, have access to just, you know, I'd love to do all that stuff. Thank you very much. Take care. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.